Bedtime stories for adults. If, like me, some of your fondest memories are of being tucked in and hearing a favorite story as you drifted off to sleep, you'll love this channel. Here, you'll find gentle bedtime readings of my own books, narrated by my assistant May, in a soft, soothing voice designed to help you relax. No jarring sound effects, no sudden noises, just calm, feel good stories to ease you into sleep. If you enjoy these stories and would like to support the channel, you can also find all of my books available on Amazon. Introduction. Winter's Festival had always been a time for celebration at the Zart Ranch, but this year it would be held at the new Kingsguard Ranch, a time for laughter, feasting, and the warmth of family gathered against the cold. But this year was different. This year, two kings arrived. Magni Bronzebeard, the unyielding king of the dwarves, and Anduin Rin, the young lion of Stormwind, stood shoulder to shoulder before Don Zart and his raven-haired love, Nimishi. Their message was simple, yet it carried the weight of destiny. The ranch must grow. On the king's golden blessing, a Kingsguard Ranch Winter's Festival would become more than a gathering place. It would be a retreat for soldiers of every banner. A place to hunt, to fish, to heal, and to remember they were never alone. A hospital and retirement home for the noble animals of the guard would rise. An inn to house the weary. Fields for contests, fires for feasts, and quiet trails for those who carried scars too deep to name. For Dawn and Nimishi, this was no posting. This was their permanent station, their life's calling. To run the ranch. To build a home where warriors could find family when they had none. And for that, they would need help. From their realm came Kylie Floggin and her bear, the faithful little sergeant, ready to heal animals and hearts alike. Nimishi called on Lola and Lepro, bound by loyalty and laughter. Together, they would turn the ranch into more than stone and timber. They would make it a refuge. But the road ahead was not without shadows. Rivalries among soldiers, grief that no feast could silence, threats from outside the ranch's borders, and within. And yet, just as often, there would be comedy in dwarves sinking boats, love found under the stars, and laughter shaking the tavern walls. This is the story of a Kingsguard Ranch Winter's Festival, a tale of drama and danger, sadness and hope, action and laughter. A tale where Dawn and Nimishi discover that family is not always the one you're born with. It's the one you choose, and the one you fight to protect. Welcome to Quest Tales, a Kingsguard Ranch Winter's Festival. Chapter 1. Winter's Festival. The fire crackled softly in the great hearth of the Kingsguard Ranch, its amber glow casting a living warmth across the stone walls. Shadows danced upon the framed memories that adorned the mantel, portraits of generations bound by duty and love. At the center, the Zart family portrait watched over the room like a blessing from the past, the painted eyes of Jonathan and Bethan soft with pride, while Dawn and Nimishi sat below them, their hands intertwined, forever captured in devotion. To one side gleamed the medal of peace, its red ribbon dulled slightly by time, and to the other hung the scroll of the King's Guard, the charcoal bear paw print, sealing an oath that had never been broken. Outside, the wind whispered through the snow-dusted pines that lined the ridge, carrying with it the scent of winter and wood smoke. The season had come early this year, coating the valley in a silver stillness that seemed to muffle even the sound of the world turning. Inside, the ranch was alive with warmth, an island of laughter and light amid the hush of the cold. It had been 3 days until Winter's Festival, and 2 months since Dawn and Nimishi's wedding. The excitement of that day still lingered in small ways, the way Dawn's eyes softened when she laughed, or how she'd rest her hand on his shoulder when passing behind him, like it belonged there, as natural as breath. The Booty Bay Armada scare was already fading into a story to be retold around fires, just like this one. A brief storm that amounted to little more than 3 renegade orc ships, their sails crooked, and their decks full of drunken fools. When the Stormwind Armada appeared on the horizon, those ships had turned tail, catching the wind and fleeing faster than any order could be shouted. Now the memory only drew chuckles and rolled eyes, like though Nimishi still kept a ready bow hanging near the door, just in case, as she'd say. At the dining table, the heart of the home beat steady. The scent of roasted venison mingled with baked bread and cinnamon cider. Bethan poured ale while chatting with Irene, their conversation flowing with the ease of old friendship. Cindy, restless as ever, couldn't keep still. Her chair squeaked. Her fingers drummed. Her legs swung beneath the table like she was testing gravity itself. Don leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly as he watched her energy fill the room. "You'd think she was running on griffin feathers and honey?" he said, drawing a round of laughter from the table. Nimishi nudged him gently. "Better that than running on coffee and mischief like you," she teased, earning a playful raise of his brow. Jonathan's deep chuckle joined the warmth of the fire. "Careful, lad," he said. "Your mother might just put her in charge of building the barn next time. That kind of energy's worth harnessing." Bethan looked up from her cup, her cheeks glowing from the firelight. "And she'd do it too," she said proudly, her dwarven burr slipping in just slightly when she laughed. "If she could reach the hammer." Cindy puffed up her chest and grinned. "I can reach it. I just can't stop swinging it once I start." The laughter filled the room again, rising like a song of family, comfort, and the promise of the days ahead. As the conversation shifted to preparations for winter's festival, Dawn and Nimishi shared a glance, the kind that spoke 1,000 quiet thoughts between them. When Dawn finally cleared his throat, the chatter paused just long enough for him to speak. "Mom, Dad, we'd like you to stay here for the festival," he said. "The ranch is big enough, and it'd mean the world to us to have you close." Bethan exchanged a look with Jonathan, who nodded with that calm, thoughtful grace that had guided the family for years. "Aye," Jonathan said softly. "We'd be honored." But that brought up the question of rooms, and with it, a flurry of cheerful debate. Jonathan quickly offered the old Zart Ranch for Irene, Cindy, and Ernie when he arrived, close enough for comfort, far enough for quiet evenings. It was settled with smiles and nods, as though it had been decided long before anyone spoke it aloud. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks that drifted like tiny stars before fading into the chimney's throat. Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the world in silence. Inside, laughter and love filled the air. And for a moment, the Zarts had everything they needed, each other, the warmth of home, and the promise of the festival to come. Later that evening, the wind had picked up outside, brushing across the shutters with a low hum that made the flames in the hearth bow and sway like they too were listening. The warmth from the fire touched every corner of the main house, filling it with that particular kind of peace only winter can bring, where the world outside is cold, but inside, hearts are warm and steady. Don sat back in his chair near the hearth, his boots stretched toward the fire, a half-empty mug of ale in one hand and Nimishi's fingers laced through the other. The light flickered against the medals and keepsakes on the mantel, each one a reminder that peace was earned, not given. Nimishi smiled softly at the fire. "It still feels strange sometimes," she said, her voice quiet, almost lost in the crackle. "Not to have to fight, not to have to watch our backs every moment." Don turned to her, his expression softening. "Strange, yes," he said, "but I could get used to strange." She laughed quietly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You already have." Across the table, Jonathan was finishing off his second mug, his mustache twitching with amusement as he watched his son and daughter-in-law. "You know," he said, "if peace makes you both this sentimental, I might have to start another war just to keep things interesting." Bethan chuckled and gave him a playful swat on the arm. "Oh, hush you! You just like showing off that you can still throw a punch faster than half the recruits in Stormwind." "That's because none of them drink their vegetables," he replied with a grin, lifting his mug in a mock toast before downing the last of it. From across the table, Irene Davis gave a warm smile, her own mug of ale raised halfway. "Don't tempt him, Bethan. If the captain starts sparring again, he'll have the whole valley doing push-ups before breakfast." Bethan let out a hearty laugh, the dwarven burr thickening with the sound. "Aye, and maybe then we'd have fewer bellies and more biceps round these parts." Even Cindy laughed at that, though she was already half curled up in her chair, chin on her folded arms, eyes heavy with sleep. Nimishi noticed first, smiling fondly. "Looks like the little hammer's running out of steam." Dawn glanced over at her. "That's a first." Bethan stood and gathered Cindy gently, tucking a wool blanket around her shoulders before guiding her toward the guest cot by the fire. "She's growing fast," she said softly. "Another year, and she'll be building barns for real." She's already building stories, Dawn said, watching the girl drift off. That's just as important. For a long moment, silence settled across the room, broken only by the steady rhythm of the fire and the soft sigh of the wind outside. It wasn't awkward or heavy, just the kind of silence that families earn, the kind where words aren't needed. Jonathan rose at last, stretching his arms until his shoulders cracked. Well, he said, I suppose we'd best turn in. Tomorrow'll be a long day of hauling wood and hanging lights, and I don't plan on being shown up by a dwarf half my size. Bethan shot him a mock glare, her cheeks flushed from laughter and ale. Aye, and I don't plan on letting ye forget it when ye are. Irene grinned as she stood too. We'll head back to the Zart place for the night then. Be back at dawn with Ernie and we'll start early. Dawn nodded. Sounds perfect. There's plenty of cider left for when you get here, and I'm sure Mom will have the ale already flowing. Bethan winked, the firelight glinting off her eyes. Aye, that she will. Winter's festival only comes once a year, and by the light we'll celebrate it proper. As the Davises bundled up and headed out into the night, their laughter fading into the wind, Dawn stood in the doorway, watching the soft flakes of snow swirl under the lantern light. Nimishi joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. Together, they watched the trail of footprints disappear into the whiteness. From above the entrance sign, a sudden screech split the quiet night. Sarge perched proudly atop his usual post, calling out into the wind. He watched the Davises' taut lantern bob and fade down the trail until it vanished in the falling snow. Then, satisfied, the great bird fluffed his feathers, hopped down from the sign, and made his way across the field, half walking, half hopping through the drifts. The snow muffled his steps, but the soft crunch followed him all the way to the barn. Slipping through the slightly open side door, Sarge gave a low chirr of greeting. Chili lifted his great white head, snorted softly, and shifted over, making space. Sarge settled in beside him, tucking his head beneath his good wing as the barn filled with the peaceful sounds of two old companions resting for the night. Inside, the fire burned low but steady. The portraits above the mantel seemed to glow with quiet pride, their painted eyes reflecting the same peace that now filled the house. 3 days, Nimisi whispered. Then the festival begins. Dawn smiled, leaning down to kiss her temple. 3 days, he echoed softly, and the start of a new chapter for all of us. The wind shifted again outside, gentle this time, carrying with it the faint sound of bells from the village below, a promise of celebration to come. And there, in the heart of winter, surrounded by firelight and family, the Kingsguard Ranch felt less like a fortress and more like home. Chapter 2, please, don't shoot my uncle. The morning came too early. The fire in the great hearth had burned down to a faint orange glow, and a thin band of pale sunlight crept across the floorboards. I stirred beneath the thick quilt, stretching an arm toward the other side of the bed, only to find it empty and cold. The scent of breakfast hit me before my eyes were even open. Bacon, bread, and something sweet bubbling on the stove. I blinked at the ceiling for a long moment, wondering if I was still dreaming. Then came the real shock. Mom's voice carried from the kitchen, cheerful and clear as the morning bells from the village below. Dad's low chuckle followed, and another voice, Nimishi's, light and laughing, and far too awake for this hour. I rubbed a hand over my face and groaned. Impossible, I muttered, throwing the blanket back. Nimichi was up before me, dressed, talking, to my father, before breakfast. I pulled on my pants and boots, half expecting to find the world ending outside my door. Instead, I found Mom at the stove, flipping thick cuts of venison bacon, Dad at the table polishing a mug, and Nimishi, my Nimishi, already dressed in soft buckskins, her braid hanging loose over one shoulder, sipping cider like it was the most natural thing in the world. Morning, sleepyhead, she said with that little grin that meant she'd been waiting for me to notice. How in the light did you get up before me? I asked, still trying to piece together the scene. Before she could answer, a loud, piercing screech split the air from outside, Sarge's unmistakable voice echoing through the crisp winter morning. Before I could react, the front door burst open. Cindy came flying in, snow trailing behind her like a comet tail. Without a word, she ran straight to the fireplace and stuck her backside out toward the flames. Cindy! Mom gasped, spinning from the stove with her spatula still in hand. It's freezing, Cindy yelped. My pants feel like ice armor. A moment later, Irene came in behind her, shaking snow from her shoulders and laughing through chattering teeth. The hearth was out last night, she explained breathlessly, so we just went straight to bed. Woke up freezing, so instead of fumbling with the fire, I bundled up Cindy and myself, left a scratchy note on the door, and headed here. Mom was already handing her a mug of hot cider before she finished the sentence. You did right, love, she said warmly. Come thaw those bones before you freeze solid. 10 minutes later, everyone was gathered around the table, plates full, steam rising from cups and bowls. The laughter came easy, as it always did when Mom was feeding people, but the peace didn't last long. Sarge let out another ear-splitting screech from outside. Then came the sound of boots stomping hard against the porch, the door flung open again, and in walked Ernie, red-faced, snow-dusted, and looking like he'd fought the storm itself. By the light, he bellowed, shaking himself off like a wet bear. It's colder than a dwarf's beard out there. He hung up his coat, stomping his boots by the door. Cindy, the stove's out in the barn. Go light it for Chili before he turns into a snow statue. Cindy groaned, already mid-bite of bacon. Go! Young lady! Ernie barked, his tone sharp but fond. Cindy huffed, stuffed one last piece of bacon in her mouth, and stomped toward the door, muttering something about unfair labor laws. Ernie stood there, watching her through the frosty glass until she disappeared into the barn. Then he turned back, his grin spreading. Dawn, come help me! Before I could ask why, he was already halfway out the door. I grabbed my coat and followed him into the biting cold. There, on the wagon, sat the largest wooden crate I'd ever seen, easily 6 feet long, maybe more. Ernie clapped his hands together. Help me get this beast inside. We hoisted the crate, the wood creaking, our boots slipping slightly on the snow as we struggled through the doorway. Nimishi, my love! I called, breathless. Open the bedroom door, please. She jumped to her feet, running ahead of us, braid bouncing. She swung the door wide and stepped aside as Ernie and I wrestled the massive crate through the narrow frame. With one final shove and grunt, it landed in the corner with a heavy thud. By the light, I gasped. What in the 7 realms is this thing? Ernie said nothing, just grabbed a thick blanket from the chair and tossed it over the crate, snow, nails, and all. Then he placed a wash basin, a jug of water, and a small mirror on top as if decorating some grand display. Nimishi tilted her head. Ernie, what the hell is that? Instead of answering, Ernie let out a sharp whistle. Everyone, come in here. Mom, Dad, Irene, and Nimishi gathered at the doorway, curious. Ernie puffed up his chest like a boy about to unveil a dragon egg. I saw this at the Academy tuck shop, he began proudly. It was their last one. All the fathers were buying them up. He paused for effect, looking around the room with a grin so wide it could have split his face. It's a do-it-yourself treehouse kit, he declared. Comes with tools, windows, shingles, even a 2-piece door. A few of my buddies going home for the holidays helped me get it here. I stared at him, dumbfounded. And that's a Winter's Festival gift? Yeah, he said, beaming. She'll love it. I smacked him lightly on the back of the head. She'll love it in the spring when the ground thaws, you idiot. He blinked at me. What? How are we supposed to dig the support holes for the beams? The ground's frozen solid. I crossed my arms, waiting for the realization to hit. It didn't. He just grinned wider. Details, he said. Besides, she can start painting the pieces. Before I could reply, the front door creaked open again. Cindy's voice called from the main room. Where is everyone? Mom was the first one out, shouting, Oh, Cindy, there you are, love. Would you be wanting some bacon, dear? Mom asked as she plopped a plate piled high with bacon in front of her. Next out was Irene and Nimishi leaned back to the door. Okay, you boys can look now. Come on out. We all headed to the table, closing the bedroom door behind us. When we joined the others, the smell of breakfast and the sound of laughter washed over everything once more. The kind of morning that made even frozen fingers worth it. The storm outside could wait. For now, the Zarts were together, and the day had begun the only way it ever should, with family, food, and a fair bit of chaos. As breakfast wound down, the morning light began to slant across the floorboards, catching the edges of plates and mugs still half full of cider. Cindy, never one to sit still for long, hopped off her chair with a quick, "I'm going to find chili!" and darted toward the door before anyone could object. Nimisi rose next, stretching like a cat. She reached up to the peg by the door and took down her bow and quiver, slinging them over her shoulder. Her tone was casual, too casual, as she said, "It's a bit late, but Mom, I planned on going hunting this morning. Feeling a bit rusty. Bear or deer?" Mom turned from the sink, wiping her hands on her apron. "Deer, please. We be running out of venison," she answered without hesitation, as though placing an order at the market instead of assigning a hunt. I pushed my chair back to stand, but Namishi's hand came down hard on my shoulder, pressing me back into the seat. Her eyes narrowed, though the corner of her mouth twitched. "You stay right there, hotshot," she ordered. "If it takes me two, I don't want the world to know." She stomped toward the door, braids swinging behind her, and with a final look that said, "Don't you dare follow," she was gone, the door shutting behind her with a soft thump. Mom, Dad, Irene, and Ernie all looked at me at once. 4 sets of eyes, same expression, part amusement, part judgment, like a jury ready to deliver the verdict. I held up my hands defensively. "What? You should be ashamed of yourself," Dad said, the corner of his mouth twitching. "I didn't tell anybody," I pleaded, reaching for more bacon and trying to look not guilty. "You didn't need to," Mom muttered under her breath, turning back to the stove with a grin she tried to hide. A few minutes later, Sarge's screech cut through the laughter, sharp, urgent, and unmistakable. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and headed out onto the porch, half expecting trouble, half hoping it was just him asking for breakfast. The cold air bit hard, bright with sunlight glinting off the snow. I shaded my eyes just in time to see a dwarf griffin rider descending fast from the clouds, the golden armor of Bronzebeard's forces catching the light. His griffin kicked up a flurry of snow as it landed in the yard. The rider dismounted, saluted smartly, and called out, "Sergeant Don Zart?" I straightened and returned the salute, puzzled. "That's me." The dwarf grinned through his beard, his breath fogging in the chill. "His Majesty, King Magni Bronzebeard, is bringing you a gift. I'm here to make sure ye don't shoot at him as he delivers it." I blinked. "Wait, what?" He dropped his salute and pointed skyward. "That." I followed his gesture, squinting against the bright sky. At first, I saw nothing but clouds. Then a massive shadow moved through them. An orc airship, commandeered by dwarves, broke through the cloud cover, its blackened hull glinting with frost, the massive balloon above creaking with tension. Dad and Ernie must have seen it through the window, because the door banged open behind me, and they came running out, weapons already in hand. Dad had his sword drawn, Ernie a crossbow cocked and ready. The poor griffin rider nearly fell over himself. "Gentlemen, please!" he shouted, hands raised in panic. "It's His Majesty! A gift for you, Don!" Ernie froze mid-step, lowering his crossbow but not relaxing entirely. "A gift?" he repeated suspiciously. "In an orc ship?" Before anyone could answer, the airship's shadow rolled over us, huge and loud, the wind of its propellers whipping snow across the yard. "By the light?" I breathed, watching as the vessel tilted gracefully into a descent. Then, from the open side hatch, a booming voice roared down. "What do ye think of this grand thing, lad?" It was Magni Bronzebeard himself, his fiery beard blazing like a torch in the wind. He leaned out of the airship's side, laughing so hard his words nearly blew away. Before I could shout back, 3 arrows whistled out from the tree line. One grazed the side of the balloon, the next clipped the rigging, and the third, dead center, sliced through the rope holding the safety mast above Magni's head. "By my beard!" Magni roared, grabbing his helm. "Ye blasted idjit! If you don't want it, I'll be taking it back." He ducked, holding his shield over his head as another arrow pinged off the rim. "Uncle!" I shouted, running toward the trees. "It's Namishi! She went hunting this morning." "Then call off your bloody archer before she skewers a king," he yelled, still crouched behind his shield. I cupped my hands and ran for the tree line, my voice carrying across the snow. "Namishi, please, don't shoot my uncle!" The bowstring twanged one more time, then stopped. Silence, followed by a distant, incredulous voice calling back through the trees, "What's your uncle doing in an orc ship?" I slowed my pace, already grinning despite myself. "I don't know yet. Something about a gift." There was a pause, then the faint crunch of snow as she ran toward me, bow still in hand. When she emerged from the pines, cheeks red, eyes flashing, she looked ready to shoot me next. Together we walked back toward the ranch, her bow still gripped tight, though she lowered it just slightly as the airship came to rest over the yard. The captain, a dwarf griffin rider, barked orders down the line. The engines sputtered, the balloon hissed, and the massive craft settled onto the snowy field like some enormous sleeping beast. Magni leaned over the railing, glaring at us, but grinning all the same. There, ye see? Not a scratch on her. A fine ship. And I brought it myself. He jumped down with the grace of a man half his size, landing in a puff of snow. Then, with a huff, he unstrapped his shield and hurled it down at Nemishi's feet. The arrow still jutted dead center through the metal. That, he said, voice booming like thunder, was right at me head, ye daft girl. Nemishi crossed her arms, unfazed. Then maybe next time, don't ride an orc ship unannounced into my hunting grounds. The dwarf blinked at her, then laughed so loud the trees shook. Aye, she's got your fire, lad, he said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to rattle my teeth. Mom, ever the peacemaker, appeared at the door and took immediate charge. Enough of that now, she said firmly. Everyone inside. There's still breakfast left, and ale for those who need thawing. The airship's captain, the griffin rider, and Magni himself were promptly ushered inside like misbehaving schoolboys, their boots leaving puddles on the floor. As the door closed behind them and the noise settled into the warmth of the house, I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. Only at the Kingsguard Ranch could a peaceful morning end with a dwarf king nearly shot out of the sky and still sit down to breakfast afterward. With everyone back inside and the snow still clinging to their boots, the warmth of the great hearth swallowed the chill whole. Steam rose from mugs, plates were refilled, and laughter replaced the roar of engines and the echo of arrows. Magni was still red-cheeked from the cold, beard dripping slightly from melted snow, while Nemishi had settled across from him with her arms crossed and a look that said, "We're not done talking about that arrow." The great wooden table creaked under the weight of food, mugs, and elbows, the sound of comfort in full swing. Ernie leaned back in his chair, still chuckling about the morning's chaos, and then, with that tone of his that meant trouble or curiosity, and sometimes both, piped up. "I've got a question," he said, lifting his mug. "How come Nemesi's arrow glanced off the balloon and didn't pop it?" He took a long swallow, set the mug down, and waited expectantly. I grinned, reaching across to pour more ale for everyone, the liquid sloshing into tankards as I spoke. "Because, Ernie," I said, savoring the little moment of authority, "that material the balloons are made out of is impervious to penetration, fire, or shock, and it's only found in one mine in all of Azeroth, right under Orgrimmar, the old orc stronghold." There was a beat of silence as Ernie's eyebrows rose, his mouth twisting thoughtfully. Then, slowly he asked, "If it can't be penetrated, burned, or shocked, how do they get it out of the ground?" He tilted his mug again and took a swig, watching me over the rim with that mischievous glint that said he knew he just stumped me. I looked at Magni. Magni looked at me. Our eyes widened at the exact same moment, neither of us having the faintest clue. Dad, sitting in the corner like a patient old bear, let out a low chuckle, the kind that carried wisdom and amusement in equal measure. "They pump it out, Ernie," he said, setting his mug aside and rising from his chair. The room quieted as he moved between Magni and me, like a teacher strolling up to the blackboard. "It's a liquid till it hits air," he continued, his voice taking on that storyteller rhythm that always drew everyone in. "And it's deadly poisonous. That's why it can't be used for armor, or we'd all be screwed." Ernie blinked, his brow furrowing. "Wait, they pump it?" Dad nodded, warming to his subject. "Aye, they spray it on cloth balloon forms and let it harden, then fill those with hot air. That's what gives the airships their strength. Not magic, just good orc ingenuity." Dad grinned, ignoring the laughter around the table. "So yes, Ernie, that's why Nemishi's arrow just bounced. The outside's tougher than dragonhide." Ernie leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing as another thought sparked. "So there's a wooden frame and cloth inside the balloon?" "Yes, son," Dad replied, turning toward him. "A light frame to hold its shape, but the real strength is that hardened skin." Ernie took another slow sip, thinking it through. So theoretically, he began, drawing out the word like a craftsman sketching a plan, a small army could crawl inside the balloon and be completely protected then? Dad rubbed a hand across his chin, mulling it over. Well, he said at last, except for the heat, and possibly the poison inside the balloon. I guess so. Not for long, but it could be done. The table went quiet for a heartbeat as everyone pictured it. An army of dwarves crouched inside a giant floating orb, sweating and coughing, waiting to pop out like angry hornets. Then Magni laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Hi! We'd win the battle, but lose the army to the fumes before we landed. Laughter rippled around the table again, filling the room like music. Dad's curiosity, however, hadn't finished its turn. He looked at Ernie over the rim of his mug, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Where did you grow up, son? He asked. In Stormwind, Ernie replied, sitting a little straighter. And your father, what did he do? He was a blacksmith, sir, Ernie said, respectful but casual, taking another sip of ale. Dad nodded slowly. And your mother? Ernie smiled faintly. She was the professor of higher mathematics at Stormwind University. There was a collective "ah" from everyone at the table, drawn out like the sound of a tavern chorus discovering the punchline all at once. Magni, wiping foam from his beard, was the first to say what everyone was thinking, though his voice was quiet, muttered into his mug. Mama's boy. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud, nearly spilling my own ale as I clapped Ernie on the back. Ernie grinned, unbothered, and raised his mug. Aye, he said cheerfully, and she taught me enough to know that liquid air skin shouldn't exist, but it does. So maybe I'm not the only one with a smart mother. Even Magni had to raise his mug at that. Fair point, lad. Smart mothers are dangerous things. They make sons who think too much. Dad chuckled and lifted his own cup. And sometimes talk too much, he added to a round of laughter. So, Uncle, I said, hoping to change the subject before Ernie's next round of impossible questions. What are you doing with an orc airship, and why bring it here? Magni set his mug down with a heavy clunk, his eyes glinting in the firelight. He rubbed a hand through his beard, the sound of coarse hair rasping like sandpaper, and leaned forward conspiratorially. I, he said, lowering his voice. Gather round, then. The story I be tellin'? The table quieted almost instantly. Everyone loved Magni's stories, even when they started with explosions and ended in bruises. About 2 a.m. last night, he began, his accent thickening with the telling, a Griffin patrol spotted an off-course airship heading straight for Dunmorog. Big, ugly thing, black as sin and drifting low through the clouds. We had just enough time to scramble 20 Griffin riders, and me, of course. Couldn't let the lads have all the fun. He took another long swig of ale, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and grinned at me. Well, we waited till it crossed our western border, then attacked. The good lieutenant here. He jerked his thumb toward the quiet dwarf seated near the end of the table, was the first to jump off his griffin onto the ship. Brave fool took out 6 sleeping sailors, or whatever they call themselves, before they even knew they were under siege. Nimishi raised an eyebrow. 6? In the dark? Magni's grin widened. Oh, aye! They were snoring like tavern dogs. Poor bastards didn't even have their boots on. By the time the rest of the crew woke up, the lieutenant here had already got hold of the helm. But that's when the real party started. He leaned back, warming to his tail, gesturing wide with his mug as though swinging an axe. The sleeping orcs scrambled up onto the deck, eyes wild, weapons clattering, but by then we had 10 more riders already aboard. Crossbows out, axes swinging, griffins screeching overhead. It was glorious chaos! He paused dramatically, letting the image sink in before lowering his voice again. It was a slaughter, truth be told. The orcs that gave up took a 2,000-foot dive into frozen ice flow lake. He let out a low whistle. None survived. Nimishi gave a short, approving nod. Efficient. Magni puffed out his chest proudly. Aye, and the good captain here. He motioned toward the dwarf still in his flight leathers and speaks a smattering of Orcish. Figured out the controls fast enough. Too big for the gates and tunnels of Ironforge, though. Couldn't land the beast anywhere without taking out a mountain wall. So naturally, I said dryly, you decided to bring it here. He beamed, completely unashamed. Aye, I thought of ye, lad, and that bastard bear o' yours. How he hates to fly. Figured this would be a proper present for that cave ye showed me. Chili's own private yacht. The table erupted in laughter, but I just shook my head, smiling despite myself. Yeah, well, I said, refilling my mug, if Anduin sees it, you'll have a battalion of King's Guards here by the end of the day. Dwarf territory or no. Magni leaned back and let out a hearty laugh that shook the plates. Already thought of that, lad. He handed me his empty mug and gestured for a refill. Hammerlock, my mage, he's been working on a paint he calls refractive light. Basically, a huge mirror. I froze mid-pour, raising an eyebrow. A mirror? Magni nodded, eyes twinkling. Aye, reflects the sky, the snow, even clouds. You'd have to fly right into it to see it. Then he turned that same mischievous grin toward Ernie. What do you think o' that, cadet? Think this old king can have a few good ideas too? Ernie scratched his chin, thinking it through while everyone watched. If it's high enough not to reflect the ground, he said slowly, it should be almost invisible. Aye, lad, Magni bellowed, slapping the table hard enough to rattle the mugs. That's the spirit. Sharp mind on this one. Ernie grinned modestly. Guess my mother's lessons are finally paying off. Ha! Magni barked, grinning from ear to ear. Don't be modest, boy. You think like an engineer. Dangerous, but useful. The table rippled with laughter again. The smell of ale, wood smoke, and roasted meat filled the air, wrapping everything in the kind of warmth that could make even the coldest day seem like midsummer. Mom moved around the table like a queen in her kitchen, refilling mugs, setting down platters of bread and meat, and fussing over anyone who didn't eat fast enough. Even Magni, the unmovable king of Cosmodon, didn't dare ignore her gentle orders. Eat, lad, she said, sliding another slice of venison onto his plate. Ye can't tell a story on an empty stomach. Magni smiled and gave a theatrical bow of his head. Aye, sweet Beth. I wouldn't dare. The sound of the fire popped and crackled behind us, and for a while, only the soft clatter of forks and spoons filled the air. Everyone was eating again. Even Nemichi, who'd cooled off enough to smirk every time Magni made a show of ducking under the memory of her arrows. And then, from the far end of the table, the young dwarf lieutenant, quiet till now, still in his scuffed leathers and looking a bit unsure of himself, cleared his throat politely. This is wonderful food, ma'am, he said, holding his plate out for more. His voice was respectful, but earnest, the kind that came from a soldier raised with manners. Mom turned, her eyes softening immediately. She reached out and pinched his cheek, earning a bright red blush across his nose. Call me Sweet Beth, dear, she said kindly. Lieutenant, was it? He stood at once, posture straight as a lance. Lieutenant Joe Ironfist, ma'am. Mom smiled, the kind of smile that could melt ice off a roof in winter. All right, Joey, she said, ladling another helping onto his plate. Sit and eat now. The young dwarf obeyed instantly, cheeks still flushed, as the table chuckled quietly around him. Magni got an evil grin on his face and leaned toward the young lieutenant, his beard twitching with mischief. Joey, is it? He asked, voice low and playful. Do ye see that older gentleman sitting there? The dwarf's eyes followed Magni's pointing finger straight toward my father, who was calmly sipping his ale and pretending not to notice. That, Magni continued, his grin widening, is the best special forces hand-to-hand fighter in all of Azeroth. And if I were you, lad, I wouldn't be flirting with his wife. The young lieutenant's eyes went wide as gold coins. No, your majesty, I, sir, I wouldn't. He stammered, his words tumbling over themselves as he jumped to his feet and stood at rigid attention, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The whole table erupted in laughter. Mom covered her mouth to stifle hers. Nemesis laughed so hard she nearly spilled her cider, and even Ernie had to hold onto the table to keep from falling backward. But no one laughed harder than Magni himself. He slapped the table so hard, the plates rattled. Sit, lad! Sit! He managed between roars of laughter. I be joking with ye! Gods above! The look on your face! Joey sat down slowly, cheeks as red as the king's beard, still unsure if it was safe to relax. Mom swatted Magni's arm with the back of her hand. You leave that sweet boy alone, she scolded, though she was laughing too. Then she turned to Joey with that warm smile of hers that could make a stranger feel like family in seconds. Joey, have you got anywhere to go for Winter's Festival? The lieutenant blinked, still trying to recover. No, sweet, ma'am, he said awkwardly, catching himself mid-slip. Fine then, Mom said firmly, nodding. Ye be stayin' here, and welcome. She glanced toward me and Nemesis, suddenly aware she might have just volunteered us without asking. She raised an eyebrow in silent question. We both smiled and nodded at once. Of course, Nemesis said, her tone warm. He's welcome here. Good, Mom said with satisfaction, patting Joey's arm as if sealing the deal. Then that's settled. You'll have a proper home for the holiday, lad. Joey's face softened into the first genuine smile since his near heart attack. Thank you, ma'am, he said quietly, and then, as if remembering, added with a grin, Sweet Beth. The table laughed again, but this time the laughter was easy, light. No teasing, just joy. Even Magni chuckled, though he was wiping a tear from his eye by now. Aye, Magni said, catching his breath and leaning back in his chair. First things first, though. He pointed his tankard toward Joey and the Griffin captain sitting beside him. You'll be double riding the good captain here back to Stormwind and his wife. He turned his gaze to the captain and gave him a mock-serious look. That's no woman I want huntin' me for keepin' her husband durin' Winter's festival. The table broke into laughter again, but the captain's eyes went wide. Aye, your majesty, and she would too, he admitted, shaking his head. Last time I was late, she near locked me out in the cold with the chickens. Magni roared, nearly spilling his ale. Then best we get ye home quick, lad. I reached into my satchel and pulled out a small, gleaming amulet, the one that shimmered faintly with griffin wings carved across its surface. Please, Captain, I said, holding it out. My griffin. It's not as fast as your royal ones, but a damn sight more comfortable than double riding. I tossed the amulet to him across the table. The captain caught it easily and turned it over in his hand, admiration lighting up his eyes. Beautiful craftsmanship, he said. Then he grinned. Thank you, Sergeant. I was not looking forward to hanging off the back of a griffin all the way home. He chuckled, slipping the amulet around his neck. I'll send it back with Joey here, he added, laughing as he gave the younger dwarf a playful nudge. Joey nodded quickly, the tips of his ears still pink. Yes, sir, he said, puffing up his chest a little, perhaps hoping to regain some dignity after nearly fainting earlier. Magni leaned back in his chair, satisfied. That's settled, then, he said, draining the last of his mug. We'll get the lad home to his wife, the balloon hidden from the king, and maybe, just maybe, we can all enjoy Winter's festival without another bloody battle. He set his mug down and glanced around the table, a small, proud smile softening his face. Aye, he said quietly. This is what the world should fight for. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The fire popped gently in the hearth, casting its golden glow across the table. Faces of soldiers, kings, and family, all sharing the same warmth, the same peace. Then Mom broke the silence, as only she could. And maybe, she said, refilling Magni's cup, this time we'll manage a Winter's festival without ye breaking something, eh? Magni threw back his head and laughed again. Aye, sweet Beth, no promises. Everyone rose from the table after breakfast, the laughter still echoing through the great room. Magni stood first, stretching with a groan that popped his back like a musket shot. Aye, time to see our good captain off before his wife decides to invade Ironforge herself, he said, his grin wide beneath his beard. Mom fussed over them both one last time, insisting on filling their hands with leftover bread and smoked meat. Then, mugs still half full, everyone followed Magni out onto the wide porch to say their goodbyes and wish a speedy return to the young lieutenant. The cold hit like a wall the moment the door opened. Frosted breath curled from every mouth, the winter sun glittering across the snow. The captured orc airship loomed in the field ahead, dark and silent, its massive balloon creaking gently in the wind. And that's when we all froze, because there, plain as day, was Cindy. The little rascal was standing proudly on the airship's main deck, hands on her hips, shouting orders to an invisible crew. A red bandana was tied around her head, and, to my horror and everyone's amusement, another one had been wrapped around Chili's. The great bear sat on the deck beside her like a loyal first mate, scratching his belly with one paw, looking completely at ease atop the stolen warship. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then I let out a low whistle. Well, I said, shaking my head, there goes the question of whether we can get Chili on that thing. Magni's booming laugh filled the air. Aye, lad. Looks like he's claimed it as his own already. Irene, however, was not laughing. She threw her hands up and stormed forward a few steps, her voice cutting through the cold like a whip. Cindy, You get off that filthy thing right now. It's full of blood. Cindy froze, then peeked over the railing, her bandana slipping slightly over one eye. It's not that bad, she called back. Before Irene could march out there herself, the dwarf captain cleared his throat. Sergeant, he said, turning to me with a sheepish grin, I'll show you her controls before I go, but, think you could get your bear off it first? I laughed, trying not to. Cindy, I called, cupping my hands to my mouth, take Chili to the pond and go sliding. Her face lit up instantly. She gave a dramatic salute. Aye, aye, Captain! Then she clambered onto Chili's back, tugged the red bandana tighter, and gave a triumphant shout. Chili, as if understanding perfectly, let out a deep grunt, then bounded off the deck with a thud that made the airship sway slightly. Together they galloped across the snow toward the frozen pond, Cindy squealing with laughter all the way. At the edge, Chili took a running leap, all four paws in the air, and landed on the ice with a thunderous crack, sending both of them spinning and sliding across the pond in wide, dizzying circles. I couldn't help but grin, watching them tumble and laugh as they slid halfway across the ice and back again. There, Captain, I said, nodding toward them. They'll be busy for hours, way over there. The dwarf captain chuckled. Smart man, he said, shaking his head. Never underestimate the power of distraction, especially with young ones. He motioned for me to follow, and we trudged through the snow toward the massive airship. The thing looked even larger up close, a beast of black iron and wood, with faint scars and scratches from its midnight battle still visible along the hull. Here, the captain said, guiding me up the gangplank. His gloved hand brushed the railing as he explained. This lever adjusts the rudder pitch. That one controls the altitude valves. And this here, he pointed at a cluster of brass knobs, is your emergency release. Don't touch that unless you like falling faster than you should. I nodded, trying to commit it all to memory, though it looked more like a mad tinkerer's nightmare than a flying vessel. Behind me, Namishi had joined us quietly. Without a word, she drew her hunting knife and began carving the names of each control into the wooden panel beside them, translating the runic Orcish script into plain English. Her letters were clean and sharp, the knife biting into the wood with practiced precision. There, she said, stepping back once she was done. Now you can fly it without needing a translator. The captain grinned. That's a clever woman you've got there, Sergeant. I smiled proudly. Don't I know it? We finished the tour of the controls, and soon enough the captain strapped on his flying gear, double-checked his mount's harness, and saluted smartly. Pleasure, Sergeant, he said, clasping my forearm in a soldier's grip. Take care of her. She's a fine ship, despite her history. Safe travels, Captain, I said. Tell your wife you owe the king of the dwarves for this one. He laughed. I will, if she doesn't throttle me first. With that, the captain and the lieutenant stepped toward their griffins, the beasts stamping eagerly at the snow. The wind whipped up around them as the riders mounted, and with a synchronized leap, the two griffins launched skyward. Their wings beat hard against the cold air, snow swirling in their wake as they climbed higher and higher until they vanished into the sunlit clouds. For a long moment, we all stood there on the porch, watching the sky until the last glint of metal and wing disappeared. The wind settled, and quiet returned, the peaceful kind that only comes after laughter and goodbyes. 2 hours later, the sound of wings came again, this time from the south. I looked up, and there they were. The young lieutenant and Hammerlock, Magni's mage, flying low on their griffins. Each mount carried 2 huge iron buckets clutched in its claws, sloshing with thick, silvery paint that shimmered like liquid glass. They landed with a rush of snow and wind, Hammerlock's robes snapping dramatically behind him. Right then, he bellowed, jumping down. His Majesty said to make her invisible. Let's get to it. Within minutes, everyone had changed into old clothes. Mom tied her hair back with a rag, Dad rolled up his sleeves, and even Namishi slipped into her work leathers. The buckets were lined up, brushes passed out, and for once, everyone was on the same team. We gathered around the towering black hull, and as the first strokes of shimmering paint hit the surface, the Orcish warship began to transform. The heavy metal gleam softened, the darkness melting into a pale, mirror-like sheen that caught the clouds and sky above it. Look at that, Ernie murmured, staring in awe. It's like painting the wind. I smiled, stepping back with my brush dripping silver. No, I said softly, it's like hiding a dream. And together, with laughter echoing through the valley and the smell of paint and winter in the air, we worked, the King's Guard Ranch shining brighter than ever beneath the cold, clear sky. Chapter 3. Running Lights. As we worked, brushes slapping against the hull and silver paint glinting in the sun, Sarge suddenly let out a sharp, echoing screech that carried across the valley. Everyone froze for half a heartbeat. By now, we'd learned that Sarge didn't make that sound unless something new was coming through the gate. Sure enough, there they were. Lola, Namishi's sister, and her husband Lepro, rolling up the snowy path in a small buckboard pulled by two longhorn sheep. The pair looked like something out of an old countryside painting. Lola bundled in a fur-lined cloak with her hair tied up in a bright scarf, and Lepro sitting proudly beside her, reins in hand, his short legs barely reaching the footrest, a broad grin under his soot-dusted goggles. "Lola!" Nimishi called, dropping her brush without a second thought. Silver droplets splattered in the snow as she ran to greet her sister. The two women met halfway between the house and the field, squealing, hugging, and talking all at once. Their laughter rose like birds scattering into the air. Lepro hopped down from the wagon, landing lightly in the snow with a puff. He adjusted his thick leather overalls, brushed the frost from his sleeves, and sauntered toward the airship with that confident little strut only a gnome could pull off. "That's a hell of a machine you've got here, Don," he said, letting out a long, low whistle that seemed to rise at the end like admiration itself. "Mind if I take a look?" "Go right ahead, brother," I said, never stopping my brush strokes, but keeping one eye on him while he circled the ship like a kid in a candy store. Lepro climbed the gangplank, or more accurately, scrambled up it, his boots thudding in short, quick steps. Once aboard, he wasted no time poking and prodding at the gears, valves, and pipes. His gloved hands moved fast, almost a blur. "Your flux inhibitor's gonna burn out in a week if you don't clean it," he muttered, half to himself. Confused, I looked at Ernie. Ernie raised both hands and shook his head quickly, a silent listening. "Don't look at me. I have no idea what that means." Lepro kept working, completely absorbed. "And your timing chain and left motion drive, one's on the wrong gear and the other's not connected at all." He popped his head over the side of the deck, grinning up at me with soot on his cheek. "Flying a bit off course, were we?" "Yeah," I said, raising an eyebrow, "like half a continent." "Thought so," he said, ducking back down again, mumbling, "Amateurs," under his breath. For the next 10 minutes, all we heard from him were muffled hums, the occasional clang, and a string of gnomish curses that were colorful enough to make even Magni blush. Every so often he'd gasp, either impressed or horrified, then chuckle or shout, "Well, there's your problem," before disappearing deeper into the engine housing. Finally, Lepro came clomping down the gangplank, wiping his small, grease-stained hands on a rag. He had a cigarette tucked behind one ear and a grin that could outshine a forge. "Now," he said, lighting up with a snap of his fingers, "I'm not going to tell you what to do with this beautiful old girl here, but if it were me, I'd fire your mechanic." I smirked, dipping my brush in paint. "Oh yeah, he was axed," I said. Lepro laughed, nearly losing his cigarette. "Good man. Saves me the trouble of telling him myself." "What would it cost to get everything fixed?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though the gnome's grin told me he saw right through me. He took a drag, squinted up at the ship, and smiled slyly. "Let me get my tools," he said, pretending to play it cool, but anyone could see the excitement in his eyes. He was practically bouncing on the spot, his boots leaving tiny prints in the snow. As the sun dipped low behind the ridge, our pace quickened. The silver paint shimmered faintly in the last of the daylight, and we still had well over a quarter of the ship left to cover, the balloon especially. The air smelled of oil, smoke, and the sharp sweetness of winter air. We painted while Lepro banged, clanked, shuffled, and swore. His rhythm became a kind of music, hammer strikes and muttered grumbles keeping time with the steady brushstrokes of the rest of us. Every so often, his small shape would vanish inside an access hatch, only for a leg or arm to stick out again a moment later, flailing as he reached for another tool. Then came the sound, sharp and sure. Tack, 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 followed by a long, rising hum. The hum deepened until the entire airship began to vibrate faintly, the metal skin resonating like a living thing. And then, with a sudden surge of light, the whole ship lit up, glowing against the twilight sky almost as bright as the moon itself. Lepro's head popped over the railing, goggles shining, and he grinned ear to ear. "You now have running lights!" The group cheered, some clapping their brushes together while others whooped into the frosty air. We took turns, some eating, some sleeping, others still painting, while Lepro kept at it, fixing and adjusting whatever caught his attention. Sparks occasionally flashed from the deck, and once we even heard him shout, "That's supposed to happen!" just before another bang echoed through the valley. By the time the first blush of dawn touched the mountains, the work was done. The ship stood gleaming, the balloon now coated in reflective silver, the hull gleaming like polished glass. It looked less like a machine and more like something out of a dream, as if it had drifted down from the stars themselves. Lepro stood proudly on the deck, wiping grease and sweat from his forehead with a rag nearly as big as he was. "Everyone off," he shouted down. "And look away! When the sun hits the horizon, this thing'll blind you. I've got to take her up a few 100 feet." I jogged a quick lap around the airship, checking every rope and ladder, making sure no one had stayed aboard. Then I cupped my hands around my mouth. "Okay, Lepro, take it up." He gave a sharp salute, grabbed the controls, and with a deep, echoing hiss, the ship began to rise. The ground trembled as the massive balloon lifted off, the reflective surface catching the newborn sunlight. For a moment, it looked as if the farm itself was rising with it. Every fence post, tree, and rooftop mirrored perfectly on the shining surface. Higher and higher it climbed, until it vanished into the glare of the morning sun. The hum faded, leaving only silence and a faint glimmer in the air. You could still hear it faintly, a low, distant whir, and then even that was gone. We stood there staring, blinking against the light. Then, out of nowhere, a long rope ladder came tumbling down from the sky, landing softly in the snow right beside the barn. A second later, Lepro came sliding down like a circus performer, boots kicking up snow as he landed with a grin that nearly split his face. "Well," he said, brushing off his coat, "that'll do." He looked up at the sky, at the invisible airship humming somewhere above us, and let out a satisfied sigh. "Now that's what I call craftsmanship." Nimishi laughed and threw her paintbrush at him, hitting him square in the chest. "Show off!" He caught it midair, one-handed, tucked it behind his ear, and winked. Guilty as charged. Mom served a hearty breakfast that morning. Knowing full well most of us had been up all night painting, hammering, and freezing our fingers off. The smell of fried bacon, fresh bread, and dwarven ale filled the air so thick you could almost chew it. Plates clattered, laughter echoed off the rafters, and no one looked entirely awake. Every now and then someone would excuse themselves to clean up, and by mid-morning, both the bath and the outdoor shower stall had been claimed by one person or another in steady rotation. Steam drifted lazily from the pipes outside, trailing up past the window panes into the cold winter air. I was just refilling Magni's mug when the door swung open, and in walked Lola, dripping, glowing, and wearing nothing but a towel around her hair. The rest of her? As free as the morning sky. For half a heartbeat, the entire table froze, spoons midair, mouths open. Then instinct kicked in. "Gentlemen, about face!" I barked, leaping to my feet. Every man in the room obeyed instantly, chairs scraping as we all pivoted toward the stove with military precision. The heat from the fire suddenly felt a whole lot warmer. "Oh, I'm so sorry!" Lola gasped, clutching the towel tighter around her head. "I had no idea everyone was in here. Nimichi, do you have a dress I can borrow? Mine's filthy and needs to be washed." I didn't dare turn around, but from the sounds behind me, Nimichi had crossed the room in about 3 steps. There was the rustle of fabric, a sharp grab, and then the sound of a door swinging shut. Mom and Irene just stood there, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, both of them looking like they were deciding whether to scold or laugh. Meanwhile, Lepro, cool as a snowdrift, kept eating. Didn't even blink. Just shoveled in another forkful and chewed like this kind of thing happened every breakfast. A few seconds later, Nimishi's voice rang out from behind the closed door, not loud but firm. "You stay in there till I come back for you." She reemerged a moment later, holding a bundle of blue fabric. Mom, can you let this dress out about 3 inches around the middle? Please? She said, handing it over. Then, turning to us with that sharp glare only a woman can muster, she added, Well, boys, did you all get a good look? There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Magni cleared his throat, set his mug down, and said without a trace of shame, Burned into my brain, my dear. The room exploded with laughter. Lepro, mouth full of eggs, pointed his fork at Magni, shoulders shaking so hard he nearly spilled his plate. The rest of us slowly turned back to the table, still grinning, trying and failing to look innocent. Irene piped up through her chuckles. Did any of you notice that my Ernie turned away before Don even said anything? She leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. Ernie blushed to the tips of his ears. Mom, ever the proud dwarf woman, turned on my father with a mock glare, a sewing needle already in her fingers. Aye, and did you get a good eyeful, Johnny? She teased, poking him lightly in the shoulder. Dad jumped a little, then grinned that same boyish grin I'd seen all my life. Oh, sweet Beth, these old eyes, he began, and before she could jab him again, he swept her up onto his lap. She gave a surprised squeak, but didn't fight it, the half-mended dress still in her hands. Dad looked around the table, his smile wide and mischievous. Would you all like to hear the tale of how this beautiful creature won my heart? Aye! Came the roar from around the table. He laughed, held Mom a little tighter as she tried to thread her needle, and cleared his throat to begin. Dad shifted in his chair, still holding Mom comfortably on his lap as the laughter faded to quiet anticipation. He took a long breath, eyes soft with memory. Now let's see, he began, his voice rolling with that storyteller's ease. Magni, Yorda was chancellor then, not yet king, right? Magni nodded, already smiling. Right, Dad said. So you had invited me back to your place for summer break from the academy, and we had a ripper of a night, a poor human cadet trying to keep up, mug for mug, with dwarves. Having never met one in person before, Magni here was my first friend at the academy, a goodwill ambassador student, they called him. He chuckled and took a sip of ale before continuing. Anyway, I woke, or more like stumbled to my feet, around 4:30 in the morning and figured a run would clear my head. So off I went, barefoot, shirtless, in nothing but a pair of buckskin pants, thinking the cold mountain air might wake me quicker. By my third lap around your family ranch, Magni, I was sweating buckets and stopped for a few calisthenics in front of a low field of hay. After about 100 toe touches, I popped up, and there she was. He paused, glancing at Mom, whose cheeks were already glowing. She was out in the field with a basket, picking something or other. She stood and stretched, and the morning sun was right behind her, shining straight through that thin cotton dress. He let out a soft sigh. I fell in love with that silhouette right then and there. The table was silent now, every eye fixed on him. The firelight flickered, painting gold across the walls. Just then, he went on, Magni here came stumbling up beside me, ale still in his hand, and without looking away, I said, What did I say to you, Magni? Magni chuckled, setting his mug down and clearing his throat. You said, Come hell or high water, I'm going to marry that beautiful creature. The table roared with laughter. Magni grinned wider, eyes twinkling. Then I said, What beautiful creature? That's just me, cousin. Mom swatted Magni's arm playfully, laughing as the others joined in. Dad raised a hand, chuckling. So before I even knew her name, I marched straight up to your Grandpa Hammersmith, General Hammersmith himself, snapped to attention, and saluted. Sir, I said, I'm going to marry your daughter. The table went quiet again. Everyone hanging on the story. Dad straightened a little, slipping easily into the memory. He put down his mug, circled around me, looking me up and down like I was a new recruit who'd lost his mind. Then he stood in front of me, squinting, and said, Which one? The room burst into another wave of laughter. I stood taller, Dad continued, smiling at the memory. I don't know her name yet, sir, I said. Then I saluted again. He saluted back, then called his daughters over. All 5 of them came running, lined up shoulder to shoulder, and he announced, This very brave, very stupid human cadet wants to marry one of ye. Who'll it be? Dad's eyes softened. And your mother took one step forward. Mom, still sitting in his lap, joined in softly, her accent thickening with the memory. I said, I saw him this morning in the field, all sweaty and manly, and I had to grab his attention. Enough, Dad barked in his best imitation of General Hammersmith, making everyone laugh again. Then he looked at me, Dad continued, and said, She be dwarf, lad. Ye be human. You'll have haters on both sides. Dad's tone grew quiet then, steady and sure. And I said, Sir, as long as she's beside me for the next 100 years, I'll fight and die for her, sir. A hush fell over the room. Even Magnie's eyes glistened in the firelight. Dad smiled faintly. He let out a long, tired breath and said, Well, ask her. Then he grabbed my arm and said, Her name Bethan. He turned to look at Mom, and for a moment it was as if time itself bent around them, carrying everyone else back to that morning in the hayfield. I marched to your mother, he said softly, got down on one knee, grabbed her hands, and said, Sweet Beth, I will love you, honor you, and stand beside you come hell or high water. You'll always be the love of my life, whether you say yes or not. But will you marry me? Mom took a deep breath, finishing the story herself now, her voice trembling with laughter and pride. I no cared that Mida was there, she said, and a whole room full of dwarves as well. I looked into me soldier boy Johnny's face, smiled, and said yes. Then I kissed him hard on the lips. A cheer went up around the table. Magni clapped, Lepro whistled, and Namishi wiped a tear from her cheek, smiling wide. Mom giggled softly and handed the finished dress to Namishi. Here's your dress, dear, she said, patting her hand gently. The fire crackled. The air felt soft with warmth and memory. And then Lola, crying, appeared from the hallway doorway, her bare shoulder and head sticking out just enough to see us. That was beautiful, she sniffled. Without missing a beat, Namishi threw the dress at her, and we all shouted in unison, Go get dressed! The room erupted in laughter again, filling every corner of the King's Guard ranch with the sound of family and firelight. The laughter still rolled through the house long after Lola disappeared down the hallway, clutching her borrowed dress. And for a while, all anyone could hear was the comfortable hum of breakfast and the steady crackle of the fire. The scent of fresh bread and sizzling bacon filled the air again as Mom began to clear dishes and hum a cheerful old tune. By mid-morning, the ranch had come alive with movement. Outside, carts were rattling down the snowy path, delivering sacks of flour and barrels of yeast stacked high. Crates of smoked pork, venison, and beef arrived one after another, steam rising from the warm wagons as teams of horses and oxen stamped their hooves against the cold. The stable yard filled with voices calling, wheels creaking, and the unmistakable rhythm of a place preparing for celebration. Sarge had been perched on the gate since dawn, calling out each new arrival with a proud screech that echoed across the valley. He'd screeched so much, in fact, that by noon the poor bird's voice had gone hoarse. His final cry came out as a dry rasp that made everyone laugh and Magni shake his head. Sounds like ye could use some honey water, lad, Magni muttered, reaching up to scratch the great bird's good wing before heading back toward the house. Inside, the long tables were already being pushed together, covered with linens, mugs, and the makings of what promised to be a feast worthy of two kings. Nemisi and Lola moved in practiced rhythm, Lola chattering about decorations and flower garlands while Nemisi, half smiling, tried to keep her sister from hanging mistletoe in every doorway. Lepro had claimed a corner of the porch, his short legs dangling from the bench as he puffed on a hand-rolled smoke and sharpened his tools, humming a dwarven marching tune between puffs. The snow outside glittered like powdered diamonds as the sun reached its peak, and then, faint at first, came the deep beating of wings. Everyone stopped. Sarge, voice nearly gone, gave one last scratchy screech of warning before settling back on his post. Feathers puffed. 4 griffins appeared out of the clouds, their riders silhouetted against the pale blue sky. They descended in tight formation, snow whirling around them in spirals as they touched down in the wide clearing beyond the barn. The first to dismount was King Anduin Rin himself, tall and steady, his golden hair bright even under the gray winter sun. Beside him came Valdor, his old friend and guardian mage, robes trimmed in blue and white, Freinlin, his staff glowing faintly with protective runes. Following them were Captain Woods, a broad-shouldered man with a calm, commanding presence, and the 2 lieutenants, Marks and Goldsby, their griffins stamping and tossing their heads proudly as the riders dismounted. The moment their boots hit the ground, the yard erupted in cheers and greetings. Don hurried out first, brushing snow from his coat, followed by Magni and the others. Anduin! Don called, his voice carrying across the wind. The young king grinned and clasped Don's arm. Sergeant Zart, it's good to see the King's Guard still keeps its hearth warm, he said warmly, glancing toward the bustle of the ranch. Looks like half the kingdom's here already. Feels like it, Don laughed. We've got enough flour and meat to feed Stormwind itself, and Sarge has been hollering so much he's near lost his voice. Anduin looked up toward the exhausted bird and laughed. A loyal sentinel. Reminds me of an old sergeant I know. Sarge tilted his head, gave a rough croak of protest, then turned one eye away with dignified offense. The crowd burst into laughter. Valdor approached next, his breath misting in the cold. I trust your hearth is ready, Don, he said in his low, calm voice. The king has brought gifts of his own, fresh cider, sweetmeats, and a few barrels from the Stormwind cellars. Magni clapped his hands together. Aye, that's talk I can drink to. Come on, lads. Let's get these kings inside before the snow decides to do what it does best. Within minutes, the yard became a flurry of motion again. Griffins being led to the stable, barrels rolled toward the pantry, and laughter spilling out through every doorway. The king's retinue joined easily with the ranch family as though they'd always belonged there. Inside, the long hall glowed with the light of two great hearths, the scent of cooking drifting through every beam. Anduin removed his cloak and handed it to Cindy, who beamed as she helped hang it by the door. Valdor took a seat near the fire, warming his hands, while Captain Woods and his lieutenants offered to help with the tables, insisting that soldiers work better with full stomachs. Outside the windows, snow began to fall again. Soft, slow flakes catching the light of the lanterns that hung from every beam. Sarge, hoarse but determined, still gave a rasping call each time another wagon arrived. The sound of saws and laughter came from the barn, where Lepro had already started building a small wooden platform for speeches and sing-alongs, as he put it. Lola was hanging evergreen garlands from the porch rail, humming to herself, while Namishi followed behind her, straightening what her sister had hung crooked. Mom's voice called from the kitchen, strong and cheerful. Dinner at 6! And someone tell the kings they'll be serving themselves. This ain't no palace! Anduin only laughed, the warmth of it echoing off the stone. Aye, ma'am, he said good-naturedly. We'll serve and scrub if it keeps the ale flowing. That drew another wave of laughter. As the evening settled in, lanterns were lit along the path, their glow flickering on the snow. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, mingling with pine and smoke. Music began, first a fiddle, then a drum, then a lute brought out by one of the lieutenants. Voices rose, laughter rolled, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Dawn caught Nimisi's hand and smiled at her across the crowded room. She smiled back, her dark eyes bright in the firelight. Winter's festival had officially begun. Chapter 4: A New Plan. The songs and laughter had faded into soft chatter, the air rich with the smell of roasted meats and cinnamon cider. Firelight danced across smiling faces, flickering against the mugs and glasses scattered along the table. Every man and woman there looked full, content, and utterly at peace. And then King Anduin Rin stood. The movement alone was enough to bring the room to silence. There was something about Anduin, a quiet power that didn't demand attention. It earned it. His presence filled the room like the soft weight of sunlight through morning mist. Don Namishi, he began, his tone calm but firm, I have a gift for you both that cannot wait until tomorrow night, if that's all right with everyone here? A low murmur of curiosity rippled across the table, followed by nods of approval. Can we get the table cleared, gentlemen? Anduin said with a smile. Let the ladies rest. In moments, every man in the room stood at once. The sound of chairs scraping, plates stacking, and mugs clinking filled the air as though the order had been drilled into them 1,000 times. Captain Woods barked something about military efficiency and led the effort. The two lieutenants, Marks and Goldsby, joined him at the wash basin, rolling up their sleeves as they laughed and started scrubbing. The young dwarf griffin rider, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, jumped in beside them, towel in hand, and grin wide. Within minutes, the long table gleamed again. Anduin smiled in approval, then turned toward Dawn and Nimisi. Now, before I show you this, he said, I have both a question and a speech. He reached down and lifted a large leather map pouch, worn smooth by use and bound with the royal seal. His hand rested on it for a moment, reverent. First, the question. Did either of you notice any griffin riders flying over your ranch about 2 weeks ago? Yes, Don said immediately. They wouldn't land, though. Sarge went absolutely nuts. Anduin chuckled. That's because they were surveying your ranch. For me. The room stirred again. The last time I visited, Anduin continued, you told me the story of how Namashi stole Sarge. It stayed with me. That bond. That loyalty. Originally, this gift was to be a simple addition, a King's Guard animal hospital and retirement area, but as I thought about it, it grew. He slipped the strap off the pouch and withdrew the rolled parchment. He didn't open it yet. Why stop there? He asked, his blue eyes glinting with that familiar spark of vision and hope. Why just the King's Guard animals? Why not include all the noble beasts who've served in every corner of our allied forces? The dwarven military, the Stormwind cavalry, the Griffon squadrons, the war wolves, the bears, the hawks. He lifted the roll high. Behold, the new King's Guard ranch. Anduin unrolled the map with a sweeping motion, and Valdor tapped his staff lightly. 4 spectral claws of golden light extended from the table's edges and caught the corners mid-air, holding the parchment open for all to see. The map glowed softly, ink lines pulsing faintly like veins of living magic. Anduin began to point as he spoke, each motion causing a faint shimmer of illusion to rise from the parchment, miniature outlines of buildings, trees, and paths flickering above the table like a dream given shape. Your original ranch, he said, sits here at the heart. The main house, stables, and your one barn. That foundation remains untouched. But now, he drew his hand outward in a wide arc, you will have so much more. To the west, 3 staff houses, small but very comfortable. These will be for your permanent crew, stable hands, healers, and their families. Each one has its own hearth and garden plot designed for warmth and privacy. He moved his hand northward. Here, an extra barn. This one is dedicated solely to permanently retired animals, those who've served the King's Guard and the dwarven military alike. They'll live out their days here, fed, brushed, and treated with the honor they've earned. Don exhaled slowly, and Nemesi's fingers tightened on his hand. Anduin smiled softly, then continued. Your stables will expand. 20 additional stalls, built to hold the largest griffins, bears, or elk from our campaigns. 2 silos will rise beside them, filled with animal grain and feed. You'll never have to worry about winter shortages again. He tapped a finger to the side of the map. Here, beside the path leading to the village, a small gift shop, trinkets for visiting families and loved ones. There'll be crafts from the dwarves, carvings from Stormwind, even hunting and fishing gear for guests. I thought of you both in that, something that ties the world you serve to the home you've built. His hand drifted further outward, toward the hills near the eastern ridge. A grand hotel, 20 rooms, each with a king-size bed. There's a great hall for gatherings, a private pool, and a naturally fed hot spring for visiting guests or soldiers on rest rotation. It'll be called the Royal Hearth. A quiet gasp moved around the room. Anduin smiled, pleased, and kept going. Your existing hunter's cabin will remain where it is, but it will now include an outdoor hanging, cleaning, and skinning area with a smokehouse attached. Any guest who hunts here will be free to leave their meat for storage, and if they don't return for it, it's yours to do with as you will. At that, Magni gave an approving nod. A fair deal, that. Waste not, want not. Anduin chuckled and continued, his voice gaining warmth. In the central field here, he drew a wide circle with his hand, we've cleared space for a tournament and training ground designed not only for soldiers, but also for the great beast you call family. It will host games like Chili's football and bucking bear. That earned a round of laughter from the table. And it will give your companions a place to play, train, and show what true strength and heart look like. Don felt Nemishi's smile against his shoulder. The room was still glowing with the magic of the map, soft light flickering across every face when I finally stood. My chair scraped gently against the floor, the sound pulling every eye my way. I have a few questions, Anduin, I said carefully, before Nimishi, and I accept your most generous gift. The young king smiled, folding his hands behind his back. Of course, Sergeant. Ask away. I unrolled the map again and nodded to Valdor. The old mage gave the faintest twitch of his staff, and once more the shimmering golden claws rose from the table, spreading the parchment wide for all to see. The light danced across the ink, and I felt its warmth against my fingertips. First, I began, glancing up at the king. Nimishi and I, we can staff the entire ranch, military and civilian alike. Anduin nodded without hesitation. Yes, you'll have full command authority, barring Captain Woods here, he added with a grin. Or my personal chef, you sly dog. Laughter rolled through the room. Even Magni's booming chuckle echoed off the beams. I grinned back, playing along. Had to ask, he makes a stew worth stealing. The laughter softened, and I looked back at the glowing map. Second question, can I bring staff from other realms if they're willing to come? I know the perfect inn owners who would run the royal hearth perfectly. Anduin didn't even pause. Done. I raised a hand quickly. Hold on now. The room fell silent again. They won't come without their daughter, Kylie, a bugler in the King's Guard. By now, she'd be finishing her final year at the academy. And she has a bear. Little sergeant. They're a team. I won't separate them. The king leaned back slightly, thoughtful, glancing toward Magni, who gave a slow, knowing nod. Valdor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, a faint blue spark flickering at the tip of his staff, as if he was already seeing into the girl's future. Anduin finally smiled, a warm, kingly sort of smile. If it's acceptable to the king, he glanced toward Magni, who raised his mug in lazy approval, then yes. Bring her and her bear too. I'll grant her early graduation, full citizenship, and permanent placement here at the ranch. A murmur of surprise passed through the table. Impressed, approving. I nodded deeply. Thank you, my king. He waved a hand dismissively. No, Don, thank you. It's a rare commander who thinks of his staff before himself. I smiled faintly, resting one hand on the map. All right, final question. The room quieted again. The fire crackled softly in the silence. When it's all done, when the last brick is laid and the final stall built, who owns the land and the ranch? Anduin's smile turned solemn. He stepped closer, the light of the map painting gold across his armor. It is yours, Don, he said simply. Yours and Nimishi's and your family's, for as long as they want it, and for as long as it stands. But if you ever sell it, you must sell it back to the Crown of Stormwind only. And that, he added with a grin, I will have in writing. He extended his hand. I looked at Nimishi. She was standing beside me, eyes bright, fingers resting lightly on the table. Can I hire my sister? She asked softly, as master gardener, and Lepro as maintenance chief, and give them one of the staff houses? I smiled. Yes, baby, of course. Lola's hands flew to her mouth, eyes welling up. Lepro just grinned like he'd known it was coming all along. Nimishi turned back to me. Then yes, please, Don. I reached out and took Anduin's hand, not the short, polite shake of soldiers, but a grip that meant something. The kind of handshake forged in loyalty, trust, and blood. I shook it hard, then pulled him in close for a hug. He laughed, clapping my back once, firm and genuine. When he stepped away, he offered his hand to Nimishi. She took it, shook once, then pulled him into a hug of her own, to the applause and good-natured whistles of everyone watching. Even Magni's deep laugh thundered through the rafters. It's settled then, he bellowed. The ranch belongs to good hearts, and may it stand 1,000 winters. Anduin turned, raising his cup. To new beginnings, he said, voice strong. To the King's Guard Ranch, the room roared in reply. And somewhere beyond the laughter, through the walls and falling snow, Sarge's familiar cry echoed out, hoarse, proud, and defiant. A perfect sound for a new dawn. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of winter air that bit the lungs but woke the soul. Frost clung to the fences, the pond gleamed like glass, and above the ranch, floating steady as a dream, the captured orc airship shimmered in a faint veil of mist, so it could be seen from anywhere on the property. After breakfast, Don and Nimishi stood out front with Anduin, Magni, and Valdor. The map of the new King's Guard Ranch spread across the porch rail. So, Don began, tapping the edge of the parchment, we'll need someone who can make this real, the right way. Nimishi smiled knowingly. Max and his team. Anduin glanced up. The same Max who built the first King's Guard Ranch? Don nodded. The very same. Best builder I've ever met. Retired now, but still sharp as an axe blade. I'll send for him myself. He knows the land, the materials, and my way of working. Civilian job, my call. Anduin inclined his head. Of course, your command, your choice. Nemishi smirked. And your headache when he argues about lumber prices. That drew a laugh from Magni, who nearly choked on his ale. Aye, that sounds like Max. By late afternoon, the snow softened underfoot, and the group decided to mark the day's end with a hunt. A friendly one, to celebrate what was coming. Dawn, Nemichi, Anduin, Valdor, Magni, Ernie, Lepro, Woods, and even Chili joined in. The great white bear padded ahead of them, nose twitching, breath steaming in the cold air. The forest was alive with the quiet song of winter, the creak of branches, the crunch of snow, the distant cry of hawks. No bears stirred, their dens already sealed for hibernation, but deer were plenty. By twilight, 7 deer had been taken clean and quick. Chili himself brought one down near the tree line with a single swipe, then looked back proudly for Nemishi's praise before laying down beside his prize like a knight beside his fallen foe. The laughter and warmth on the way home filled the forest as surely as the scent of pine and frost. Back at the ranch, the smell of roasting venison rose into the evening air. The firelight flickered through the windows, voices carried in bursts of laughter, and the night felt alive again. When the dishes were cleared and the fire burned low, Dawn stood and turned to the king and his mage. There's one more thing we'd like to show you, he said. Anduin raised a brow. Oh, you're full of surprises tonight, Sergeant. They stepped outside into the moonlight. The airship hovered just above the field, its hull gleaming under the moon, a thin shroud of mist swirling around its balloon like captured cloudlight. At the helm, Lepro stood proud, hands on the wheel, his green beard catching the starlight. Permission to show off, Commander? He called. Granted, Dawn said, smiling. Anduin stared upward, wonder softening his royal posture. By the light, she's magnificent. She's ours now, Dawn said. Lepro and Magni salvaged her after the battle. She's been reforged, rewired, and enchanted clean. She runs smoother than a royal carriage. Valdor tilted his head, studying the faint sigils glowing along the hull. Impressive, but she'll never fit through the porthole of the realm pendant I gave you. Dawn nodded. That's what Hammerlock thought too, until Lepro got involved. Lepro's grin widened. Me and Hammerlock spent the better part of 2 nights tinkering with her. See that cannon strapped to starboard? He gave it an affectionate pat. It's not a cannon anymore. It's a realm projector. Valdor's brows rose. You converted a cannon into a planar lens? Aye, Lepro said proudly. With Hammerlock's runes and my flux drives, it doesn't fire shot, it fires passage. Anduin blinked. I beg your pardon? Lepro nodded toward the cannon. Here's how it works. The one holding the barrel focuses on where they want to go. That's you, Dawn. While another, like me, steers. 2 minds working together keep the gate stable. Dawn stepped forward and laid his palm flat on the cannon's warm metal surface. Ready, Lepro? Lepro grinned. Aye, Commander. Whenever you are. Dawn closed his eyes, thinking of Stormwind's courtyard, the marble towers, the banners fluttering high above the gates. The airship hummed beneath his feet, the runes along the hull flickering to life. A sound like thunder whispered through the clouds, and the sky tore open. A vast ring of light formed above them, swirling in gold and silver fire, widening until it covered half the heavens. Beyond it shimmered another realm. Stormwind itself, glowing faint and distant in the dark. The deck vibrated gently as the airship rose, the mist around it glowing like liquid moonlight. Valdor's eyes went wide. By the ancients, it's stable. Anduin stepped closer to the rail, awe in his voice. You've just created a bridge between worlds. Lepro kept one hand on the wheel, his voice calm but proud. Hold steady, lads. She's balanced on thought and will. As long as Dawn focuses, she'll stay open. Dawn's eyes remained fixed on the light. All right, Lepro. Bring her about. The airship slowly turned beneath the glowing ring, hovering close enough that the light reflected across every polished surface. Anduin couldn't stop smiling. Do you realize what this means? Nemishi stepped up beside Dawn, her voice low and certain. It means we're not just caretakers anymore, my king. We're connected to everywhere that needs us. Dawn opened his eyes, the portal beginning to fade as he released his hand. The hum softened. The light folded inward until the stars reclaimed the sky. Valdor exhaled slowly. Extraordinary. Travel between realms, on command, and all powered by thought. Lepro chuckled, striking a match with one hand and lighting a fresh smoke. And here I was just trying to make her fit through a hole. Magni's laughter thundered across the deck. Aye, lad! Ye outdid yourself this time! Anduin turned to Don and Nemesis, his expression proud and warm. You've turned one ranch into something greater, a hub for heroes, a bridge between realms. Stormwind will remember this. Don smiled, slipping an arm around Nemesi's waist as Chili huffed beside them, snow on his muzzle and pride in his eyes. Then we'll make sure it's worth remembering. The wind stirred, carrying the sound of the ranch below. Laughter, hammers, the distant cry of Sarge's hoarse call echoing into the night. And above it all, the airship drifted quietly, a glowing guardian in mist and moonlight. Chapter 5, Winter's Festival. The cold morning air still held a crisp bite as we set off walking the ranch. Nimishi, Ernie, Irene, little Cindy, and me, with Chili padding behind like a giant white shadow. His paws made soft, crunching sounds in the snow, and every breath he took came out in rolling clouds of steam. The ranch glowed alive with the hum of Winter's Festival. Smoke curled from every chimney, ribbons fluttered from fence posts, and the smell of bread, spice, and wood smoke clung to everything. We followed the trail that looped past the barn and wound toward the north pasture, the snow deep but clean and glittering under the pale sun. Cindy ran ahead, tossing handfuls of powder at Chili, who pretended to be offended, snorting and plowing through snowdrifts like a great playful dog. We stopped when we reached the old willow. Its trunk was twisted and wide, its bark darkened by time, and the top had been sheared clean off years ago by lightning, flat as a table 10 feet up. The old thing stood like a monument against the pale sky. Cindy tilted her head. It looks funny, she said, like it got broken and just decided to stay that way. I smiled, brushing a gloved hand over the bark. That's the dreamer's tree, I said softly. She looked up, curious. Why is it called that? Because once, long ago, I said, 2 lovers were torn apart when one's family had to move far away. But they promised to meet once a year, right here under this tree, no matter how far apart life took them. They kept that promise every single year for the rest of their lives. Cindy's eyes went wide. Every year? And every year, I nodded. When they were old, they were buried right here beneath it. The story says the lightning that struck it came the night they were laid to rest, so the light would always shine down on them. Nimishi stepped beside me, brushing her fingers along the rough bark, her voice soft. It's a good place to remember love. Ernie grinned, his breath fogging. And I bet you carved your name somewhere on it, didn't you, Dawn? I laughed. Not quite. But Max, Danny Dixon, and I used to talk about building a treehouse up there. We never did. Guess we got too busy growing up. Nimishi smiled faintly, though she said nothing, just squeezed my arm and looked back toward the ranch. We lingered there a moment longer before heading back, the tree standing behind us like a silent guardian, its shadow stretching long across the snow. Back at the main house, the Kings had claimed the warmest chairs. Magni sat sunk deep in one armchair, puffing at a thick dwarven cigar, while Anduin leaned on the window frame with a mug of steaming ale. The room glowed with firelight, the air thick with the smell of pipe smoke and roasted pine. Strange thing, peace, Anduin said, swirling his mug. After years of war, it almost feels like we've forgotten what to do with it. Magni grunted a laugh, smoke curling from his beard. Aye, lad. Peace gives you too much time to think. That's why I keep my hands busy. Less thinkin', that more drinkin'. He raised his mug and Anduin clinked his against it. To peace, then, and to the fools who built it. Magni smirked. And to fools still buildin' it. In the study, Valdor and Hammerlock had taken over the great oak table, their parchment and ink scattered everywhere. The air hummed softly with spellcraft. If Sir KB's corruption spreads through the realm currents unchecked, Valdor muttered, he'll collapse another boundary before spring. Hammerlock nodded grimly. We'll need a way to track him through the breaches, some kind of bond anchor tied to Dawn and Nemishi's life force. Valdor stroked his chin. 2 halves of the same key, attuned to their connection. Hammerlock smiled. Aye, perfect. Let's make him easy to find and harder to forget. Meanwhile, Lieutenants Marks, Goldsby, and Iron Fist had found their own way to keep busy. Down in the barn, under an old tarp, they unearthed a rusted iron-handled auger, a drilling auger used for making post holes. Still got some bite in her, Goolsby said, testing the handle. Iron Fist grinned. Perfect. Let's see if she'll chew through ice. Within the hour, they had hauled it out to the pond, cutting neat circles through the frozen surface. Soon the three of them were ice fishing like a pack of mischievous boys instead of soldiers, laughing loud enough to wake half the valley. By dusk, the ranch glowed gold and amber under the lanterns. The smell of roasted meat and baked apples drifted through every doorway, and the music of laughter and clinking mugs rolled from the main house. Inside, the fire burned bright and strong, reflecting off the wreaths and garlands that hung from the beams. Beside the hearth stood a tall stack of gifts wrapped in ribbons and paper, each one waiting for later in the evening. And at the very top of the pile sat one enormous crate wrapped in red and gold, with a large tag that read, in careful script, "To Cindy, from Mom and Dad." The long oak table stretched from one end of the great room to the other, heavy with roasted venison, honey-glazed carrots, and golden loaves of bread still steaming from the oven. Lanterns hung from the beams, their light glinting off polished plates and mugs, while pine garlands and blue ribbons ran the length of the table. The air was thick with warmth, laughter, and the smell of butter and spiced cider. At the head of the table, my father rose with his mug raised high, clearing his throat. "My son insisted I do this speech," he began, giving me a half smile, "even though it's his ranch. But since I'm the oldest—" Mom cleared her throat sharply beside him. He grinned without missing a beat. "Since I'm the oldest male," he corrected, "I'll proudly welcome all of you to the Kingsguard Ranch on behalf of the Zart family." He took a long breath, his eyes scanning the faces around the table. Friends, family, soldiers, and kings. "Now," he said, "I think it would be great if each of you stood and told what you're grateful for this year. I'll start. This year, my wife, my son, and my new daughter came back into my life. I can't think of anything greater than that, so I'll shut up and let you all continue." He sat down to a round of applause, and Mom patted his arm with a proud smile. Bethann stood next, cheeks flushed from the firelight. "I'll keep it short," she said. "I'm grateful for laughter again, for the smell of baking in a house that was too quiet for too long, and for our family being whole once more." Nimishi reached over, squeezing her hand. Bethann smiled and nodded, sitting down again as the table murmured their agreement. Magni Bronzebeard stood with a grunt, his beard gleaming in the firelight. "I'm grateful for good ale, good company, and for the lad and lass who made this place more than just a ranch. This," he gestured around the hall, "this is what peace looks like, even for an old dwarf like me." He raised his mug. "To the Zarts, to the light, and to not fallen off me chair before dessert." Laughter burst around the table. Anduin nearly spit his drink as Magni sat with a satisfied grunt. Anduin Rin rose next, every inch the king even without his crown. "This year," he began, "I've seen courage not born of war but of love. The kind that builds instead of breaks. Don Nimishi, thank you for reminding us that sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is come home." He sat to a quiet round of respect, the kind that hums low and true. Valdor pushed himself up next, leaning slightly on his staff. "I am grateful," he said, "for a warm fire, old friends, and young fools who keep giving me reasons to get out of bed in the morning." Magni laughed. "Careful, wizard, you'll start sounding sentimental." Valdor smiled faintly. "I'll risk it." Hammerlock stood and raised his mug. I'm thankful that my beard hasn't caught fire tonight, and that the company's as strong as the drink." He sniffed his mug. "Which, by the way, could strip paint." The table roared with laughter again. Ernie and Irene stood together. Irene spoke first, her eyes kind and voice soft. "I'm thankful for friendship that became family, and for the people in this room who remind me the world's still worth fighting for." Ernie raised his mug next. "And I'm thankful for a wife who puts up with me snoring, and for bacon, glorious bacon." Mom snorted and clapped. "Aye, to bacon." Lepro hopped up onto his chair, pipe in one hand, mug in the other. "I'm thankful for friends who don't mind a bit of tinkering in their barn, a workshop with heat, and a wife who lets me smoke indoors. Sometimes." Lola gave him a playful glare. "You're sleeping in the workshop tonight, love." He grinned. "Worth it." When it came to Nimisi's turn, she rose quietly, her hand brushing my shoulder as she did. "I'm grateful for second chances," she said softly, "for finding love again, for for family that welcomed me without question, and for a home that feels alive. For a moment, the room was still. Only the fire crackled, and outside the wind hummed faintly against the window panes. My father raised his mug again. To home, he said simply, and everyone echoed it, their voices low but strong. To home. The feast carried on deep into the night. Platters emptied, mugs refilled, and songs broke out between bites and laughter. Magni's booming voice led a dwarven drinking chant, while Anduin and Valdor pretended not to know the words, but sang anyway. Bethan kept the food coming, somehow always having just one more pie, and Mom's ale, brewed thick and sweet, made sure no one left the table thirsty. By the time the last mug was drained, the room glowed warm and gold, heavy with comfort. Outside, snow fell soft as feathers, blanketing the ranch in silence. In the barn, Chili had already returned from his evening patrol. What waited for him made his ears perk, an entire mountain of smoked deer neatly stacked by the wall, each wrapped and tagged with care. He sniffed each one slowly. Bethan's smelled faintly of cinnamon, Nemesi's of honey, mine of smoke and salt, and Cindy's tag was scrawled in bright red crayon. The great bear grunted in satisfaction, devouring them all one by one until his belly was round and his eyelids heavy. With a deep sigh, he curled beside Sarge's perch, his snoring rolling through the barn like distant thunder. Back in the house, laughter softened to murmurs. Chairs creaked, firelight flickered low, and the warmth of family filled every shadowed corner. Winter's festival had found its heart, and though the night was far from over, the ranch had never felt more at peace. We all got up from the table, stretching, patting our bellies, and laughing about who'd eaten the most. Chairs scraped across the wood floor as we shuffled toward the living room for gifts. All except Cindy. She sat slumped forward at the table, her head resting on her folded arms, hair spilling like black silk across her sleeve. As I passed, I leaned close and whispered, "Cindy, gift time." Soft enough not to wake her if she'd truly fallen asleep. To my surprise, her head shot up like she'd been hit with a spark spell. "Gifts?" she squealed, and before anyone could blink, she was on her feet and sprinting for the living room, nearly bowling over my father and 2 kings on her way through. Laughter rippled behind her as we all followed, finding our spots around the roaring hearth. I turned to my father. "Dad, I'd like you to be the one to hand out the gifts this year." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you 5, boy?" "This year I am, Dad," I said, pulling him in for a hug. "This year I am." Mom chuckled and wiped her hands on her apron. You've been actin' 5 all day anyway." As everyone settled, Lola piped up cheerfully. "Gift wrapping ribbon donations over here, please. I reuse them." Mom gave her a sharp look and waved a finger. "You'll not be hoarding ribbons on this ranch. I've no room for mess." Lola grinned, unfazed. "No, sweet Beth. I use them in the garden for the plants." Mom clapped once. "Ear now, all unwanted ribbons to Lola for the gardens." Everyone laughed as ribbons began to pile beside her chair. Dad stood, stretching his back, and reached down for the largest crate near the fire. With a single, effortless lift, he hoisted it onto the floor in front of Cindy. Ernie and I exchanged a look of mock amazement. "This one," Dad said, "is for Cindy from Mommy and Daddy Davis." He stepped back quickly, and just in time, because Cindy came at the crate like a whirlwind. Ribbons and paper flew everywhere. She tore one ribbon off and tossed it aside, then stopped mid-motion, picked it back up, and ran it over to Lola before returning to the box. She lifted the lid and frowned. A box of windows. Ernie chuckled, kneeling beside her. "No, sweetness. It's a do-it-yourself treehouse kit." He rummaged through the box. "Somewhere in here's a book with 8 different designs you can make." Here!" He pulled out the thick instruction manual and flipped it open. Cindy gasped, eyes darting across the pictures. "We can make all of these?" Ernie nodded proudly. "All of them, with the right tools. And I'll help you when the ground thaws." From that moment on, every other gift was forgotten. Cindy hugged Ernie and then the box, announcing it the best gift of her life. When things quieted again, Dad lifted another package. "To Anduin, from Don and Nemishi." The king accepted the heavy box with a small bow. "Thank you, Don Nemesi," he said sincerely. He carefully unwrapped it and drew back the paper to reveal a beautifully carved statue of a griffin in flight, its wings stretched wide and detailed down to each feather. He blinked hard. "I know this griffin," he murmured. I stood beside him and nodded. Sir Farts-a-lot, I said with a grin. The markings are perfect. We had it made by a local craftsman, a friend of mine, Peter. A rival once, now a brother in craft. I clapped his knee. A story for our guests after gifts? Anduin nodded silently, eyes bright. Yes, he said softly. After gifts. Mom clapped her hands suddenly. Ye be too slow, Johnny. Sit yourself down, she said, swiping up an armful of packages. New buckskins for the lot of ya, tailored to fit tight as they should. She dropped a bundle in each man's lap, mine, Ernie's, Magnie's, and Anduin's, then paused before Joey Ironfist. Joey, lad, she said gently, I didn't get a chance to take your measurements, but here, lad, this was me father's when he was a rider. From a drawer she pulled a weathered leather messenger's pouch, its flap still bearing the faint emblem of the dwarven air riders. She smelled it once, smiled, and handed it to him. Still smells like the general. Joey took it with both hands, eyes wide. Thank you, ma'am. He hesitated, then hugged her before quickly snapping to attention. Sorry, sir, he said to my father. Dad laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. Sit, boy, or I'll kill you later. The room erupted in laughter. Then Valdor stood abruptly, beard bristling with mischief. My turn! He tossed small packages into everyone's laps. Speaker stones, he said proudly. My own invention. You put it between your palms, think of the person you want to talk to. He demonstrated by holding his to his forehead, and presto! A glowing blue orb appeared beside me, and Valdor's smirking face appeared within it. Dawn, you're a useless fart. The illusion said, then vanished. The table burst into cheers and laughter. Valdor grinned. They'll last a year, longer if you don't use them to call your mother every 5 minutes. Before anyone could reply, another orb appeared between Namishi and me, Cindy's face glowing inside it. Uncle Donnie, Aunt Namishi, can I build my treehouse on the dreamer's tree, please? We both shouted, laughing. Yes, baby. Cindy gasped, wide-eyed. Oh, it works! I heard you in my head and my ears. It works. She ran and hugged Valdor, nearly knocking him backward into the tree. He patted her head. Brilliant, aren't I? The gifts kept coming. Mittens, socks, trinkets, and snacks. Lola's lap became a mountain of ribbons, which she kept trying to stack neatly before they rolled to the floor again. Then, just as the laughter hit its peak, there came a knock at the front door. Sarge must be sleeping, I said, getting up to answer it. Standing outside in the snow was Max, bundled in a heavy coat, holding something under his arm. I don't want to interrupt, Donnie, he said softly. Just wanted to give this to you for Winter's festival. I ushered him into the kitchen near the fire as Anduin began telling his Sir Farts-a-lot story in the other room. Max handed me an old, dented tackle box. Remember this? You, me, and Danny used to steal it off each other all summer long. I thought it was gone for good. I laughed. Taking it, I remember, and the day I caught Danny using my favorite lure, stuck it right in his backside. Max laughed so hard he wheezed. We sat together for a while, sharing roast, ale, and 1,000 memories of younger days. Then I smiled. I've got a gift for you too, Max. I unrolled the ranch map and held it open across the table. This is the new King's Guard Ranch, funded by both crowns, yours and mine, and you and your men are going to build it. Max's eyes widened. Me and my men are going to be rich. I said. Start with 3 cottages, guest houses, a greenhouse, heated bath, small smokehouse, 2 bedrooms each, and a big eating kitchen. When can you start? Tomorrow morning, Donnie. For this. Tomorrow early. I clapped his shoulder and called into the other room. Valdor, a moment, please. He appeared at the door, wiping his hands. Thank you for rescuing me. I've heard that story 1,000 times. Valdor, can you duplicate this map for Max? He'll need copies. Valdor grinned. Better than that. Put it away. I rolled up the map, and with 2 sharp claps, glowing blue runes filled the air. A full set of detailed blueprints appeared on the table. Measurements, foundations, elevations, everything. Max and I both let out low whistles of amazement. Just then, Anduin walked in, eyes red. What's all this then? Disrupting my Sir Farts-a-lot story? I looked at him. Why are you crying? He sniffed and muttered, You'll never know now, will you? He smirked, wiping his eyes. I know, buddy, I said quietly. I was there. Anduin smiled, nodding once. I wish you were, Don. I really wish you were. We rejoined the group in the living room. Max slipped out quietly into the snow while the fire popped and crackled behind us. I took Nemesi's hand and stepped into the center of the room. Nemesi and I would like to make a few transfers tonight before everyone retires. The room fell silent, mugs and ribbons forgotten. Lieutenants Marks and Goldsby, I said clearly, the King's Guard Ranch requests your permanent transfers to its service. Before they could answer, Anduin raised his mug. Done. The two lieutenants grinned, saluting proudly. I smiled. Now, my mother would have my hide if I didn't ask Joey to join as well. Magni slammed his mug down. Done, he barked, elbowing Anduin. Beat you to it. Laughter rolled around the room again. Boys, I continued, for now you'll stay in the hunter's cabin until better housing is ready. Tomorrow, you can borrow our griffins and collect your gear from your barracks. Lieutenant Mark stood at attention. No need, Sergeant. His Majesty told us this might happen. We brought everything with us. Anduin raised his mug toward me and winked. Well then, I said, Joey, go fetch your gear tomorrow anyway. I tossed him my griffin token. He caught it, saluted, and sat down grinning ear to ear. Then I turned to my father and mother. Captain Zart, the King's Guard Ranch requests you come out of retirement for permanent placement as Dean of the Ranch and your lovely wife as head and master chef. Dad rubbed his chin, pretending to think. Well now, I don't. Mom smacked his arm. Johnny, you accept right now. The room roared with laughter and cheers. I raised my mug for the final time. Cadet Ernie, Irene, Cindy, there are jobs and housing for you all here if you choose to stay. Ernie and Irene stood, hands linked. Thank you, Don. Nemesi, Ernie said, voice steady but thick. But after I graduate, we want Cindy to see the world. We're hoping to be stationed abroad, to learn, travel, and teach her new ways. It's what we've dreamed of since the academy. I nodded, smiling. I understand completely. I looked toward Anduin. He stood, royal calm but eyes warm. Cadet Ernie Davis, upon completion of the academy, you and your family will serve 1 year in each of our allied bases. Enough time to learn languages, customs, and cooking, then you'll report back to Sergeant Don Zart for reassignment by King's command. Blah, blah, blah. The room erupted in applause and laughter again. Ernie and Irene were radiant, bowing to the king as Cindy clapped furiously. I raised my mug one last time. It's been a wonderful day. Thank you all for being part of it. My wife and I are going to retire for the night, but please stay as long as you wish. Eat, drink, and enjoy the warmth of this house. There are rooms for some and bunks for all. I took Nemichi's hand, and as we walked toward the main bedroom, the sound of laughter, clinking mugs, and soft music followed us down the hall. Behind us, the fire crackled. Voices mingled, and the snow whispered against the window panes. The first winter's festival at the King's Guard Ranch had come to an end. Not with ceremony or crowns, but with warmth, family, and love. Chapter 6, New Foundations. As the bedroom door closed, Nemishi turned, her eyes blazing with mischief. Before I could speak, she caught me in a kiss that left no room for words, just the rush of breath and heartbeat. I've been waiting to do this all day. She whispered against my ear, laughter and desire tangled together. Her hair brushed my face, her hands urgent and sure, and the room filled with the sound of our laughter echoing off the timbers. The storm outside howled against the shutters, but inside was nothing but heat and heartbeat. When at last the laughter quieted, Nemishi padded to the wash basin, her skin glowing in the firelight. She looked over her shoulder with that wicked grin of hers. I'm guessing that performance was for your sister's ears? I said, grinning. Yup, she replied, voice low and playful. Thanks for playing along. She splashed cool water over her face, then turned back, eyes soft now. Now get that scratchy uniform off and into bed. I want to cuddle. Yes, Lieutenant Ma'am, I said, peeling away the uniform and slipping under the thick furs. She crossed the room in a single leap and landed perfectly beside me, head resting on my chest. The last log cracked in the hearth, sending a spray of sparks upward. Now, she murmured, just for us. The night fell quiet. The wind softened outside, and warmth filled the space where words no longer mattered. Morning came quietly, like a secret whispered through the rafters. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside wrapped in soft white silence. Pale sunlight spilled through the frosted window panes at the back of the house, tracing gold across the blankets. Nemishi stirred first, her breath warm against my chest. Morning, Sergeant, she murmured. Morning, Lieutenant, I answered, brushing a lock of her dark hair from my face. For a long, peaceful moment, neither of us moved. The world could have stopped turning, and it wouldn't have mattered. Only when the scent of baking bread and coffee drifted in from the kitchen did Namishi sigh and nudge me. Up! The world waits for no dreamer. I groaned, swung my legs out of bed, and reached for my boots. The world can wait for coffee, at least. From the open den beyond the hallway came the muffled sounds of conversation, Bethan's warm laughter, Lola's quick chatter, and the faint ring of dishes being set to dry. The home was alive again, full of voices and warmth. When Namishi and I stepped into the main room, the glow of the hearth met us. Mom and Lola were at the stove, turning dough and chatting in rapid-fire dwarvish while Bethan's voice rolled like music through the kitchen. "Ye be late, sleepyheads," Mom teased. Outside, the first strikes of hammers echoed across the valley. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, blinking into the sunlight. Max and his crew were already at it. Bundled in furs, boots deep in the snow, laying out timbers and shouting measurements over the crisp air. "Rise and shine, Donnie!" Max bellowed from atop a sled of lumber. "If you want these cottages before the end of the month, best keep the coffee flowin'." Lepro was there too, half buried in snow up to his chest, tinkering with a contraption that puffed little clouds of steam. "Automatic nail driver," he called. "Or maybe smoke machine. We'll find out." Namishi joined me on the porch, wrapping her cloak tight. "He's gonna blow something up before noon." "Probably," I said, "but we'll call it progress." From the barn came a deep, rumbling groan, the sound of something large stretching after a good night's rest. A few moments later, Chili emerged into the sunlight, his white coat gleaming like snow made flesh. Frost clung to his fur in tiny sparkles, his breath a fog that rolled across the yard. He blinked, yawned so wide I thought he might swallow a fence post, then lumbered forward with the deliberate gait of a creature who knows he's the largest thing for miles. The workers froze mid-hammer. One man even set his saw down and took an instinctive step back. Max, standing atop a timber pile, called down nervously, Donnie, your bear's on inspection duty again." "Let him," I said, leaning on the porch railing with a grin. "He's quality control." Chili trudged right up to the first set of foundation beams and sniffed along them, his nose twitching. He gave a low grunt of approval, then padded to the next stack of lumber, brushing the top of the planks with his massive paw. The wood creaked, but held firm. Satisfied, the great bear turned his head toward Max, huffed once, loud enough to ruffle the dwarf's beard, and then gave what could only be described as a curt nod before lumbering off toward land. Max wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. "Aye. Well, if the foreman's happy, I guess we keep building." Laughter rolled across the worksite, and the tension melted. Cindy came running behind him, bundled in a coat twice her size, clutching a wooden mallet. "I'm helping," she declared. "You're supervising," Namichi corrected, smiling. "Supervisors get cookies, not tools." Cindy considered this. "Then I'm the supervisor," she said proudly, and dashed off toward Mom's kitchen for her reward. By mid-morning, the ranch was alive with rhythm, hammers striking, saws singing, the smell of fresh-cut wood mingling with smoke and cinnamon from the main house. Valdor and Hammerlock stood near the tree line, heads bent over a scroll, their voices low and serious as they discussed the matter of Sir Kaby. Every so often, the air shimmered faintly around them, runes glowing like small suns before fading again. "They're planning something," Nemesi said, watching. "They always are," I replied, "and it usually works, eventually." She smirked, elbowing me gently. "That's not confidence, Sergeant. It's experience." By noon, the ranch thrummed like a forge. The first cottage's foundation beams were already in place, sawdust dancing in the sunlight. Lepro's nail driver spat rhythmic bursts of smoke, and Max's voice rolled over the hammering like thunder. "Haul that timber square, lads. Donnie wants it solid enough to survive a dragon landing on it." The smell of stew drifted from the kitchen window, and Bethan's voice cut through the din. "Lunch in 10, no exceptions." I took one long look around, the snow, the sound, the laughter, and felt something tighten in my chest. This wasn't just rebuilding. It was beginning again. Out of the main house came Anduin, Captain Woods, and Magni, with young Joey in tow, each of them bundled against the chill, their breath turning to clouds as they stepped onto the porch. Valdor and Hammerlock trailed behind, still mid-argument over something that clearly involved too much magic and not enough common sense. Anduin was first to speak, his blue cloak brushing the snow. Don Nimichi, he began, duffel bag slung over one shoulder and his prized griffin statue tucked carefully under his other arm, I want to thank you both for an unforgettable winter's festival. You're leaving so soon? Nimici asked. He smiled wistfully. I'd love to stay, but Stormwind won't run itself. Say goodbye to Chili for me and tell him he can have what's left of my deer in the smokehouse. He's earned it. From across the porch, his voice lifted in a commanding bark. Valdor, come on, we're leaving before you try to turn that tree into a telescope again. Valdor grumbled, clutching his staff. It would have worked if someone hadn't. Now! Anduin cut him off, and the mage gave a long, dramatic sigh before following. The king turned once more, his eyes softening. Don, Nimishi, you've built something special here. Hold on to it. Then he saluted, old soldier to soldier, and strode toward his griffin. Within minutes, the great bird launched skyward, its wings scattering plumes of snow as it climbed into the bright winter sky. Magni was next. He slapped me so hard on the shoulder I almost lost my footing. Hell of a festival, lad. Lass. His beard twitched as he grinned. And ye be needin' anything for this ranch, ye be askin' Anduin. 'Tis his grand idea, after all. I'd just be allowin' it on dwarf land, that's all. Before I could respond, he added with a wink. I kissed your mug goodbye, told her I'd be back next year, and she went blubberin' into the other room. Soft as pudding, that one. She'll deny it later, Nimishi said, smiling. Aye, that she will. Magni laughed, pulling us both into a bear hug that could have cracked a rib. We see ye next year, lad. Same time, same ale, more pie. He turned toward the yard and bellowed, Hammerlock! We be leavin'! Move your arse before the king flies off without us. Hammerlock, still clutching an empty mug, shuffled out muttering something about unfinished research before Magni clapped him on the back and sent him marching toward the griffins. Captain Woods came next, adjusting his coat and grinning like a man who'd just survived a holiday with his in-laws. Hell of a feast, Don! And thank you, Nimishi, for not hitting me while I was here. Nimishi laughed, stepped forward, and kissed him lightly on the cheek, right where she'd clocked him on the mountain months before. Sorry about that, Rob. Entirely my fault, dear lady, he said gallantly, straightening his collar. We'll see you next year? And every year after that? Rob, I said, shaking his hand firmly. He stepped down from the porch, calling back over his shoulder, I'll be sure to let Sweet Beth know my sizes before I come. Pretty sure I've put on 20 pounds this weekend. Try 30, Bethan shouted from the kitchen window. The entire porch erupted in laughter as Woods saluted her with mock offense and trudged off toward his mount. Finally, young Joey stepped forward, standing tall and proud in his Griffin Rider's leathers. I'll be back in a few hours, Sergeant, he said crisply. I'm looking forward to riding your Griffin. The Sky Captain said it was the most comfortable beast he's ever ridden. Careful, I warned. He bites show-offs. Joey grinned, unfazed. Might I bring my hobby back with me when I return, sir? What hobby, Joey? I asked. Oh, I like to cook, he said, suddenly sheepish. Got all me own pots and pans from me grandmother in Ironforge. Nimishi's face brightened. You cook? Well then, that settles it. Bring your hobby and your appetite. You'll fit right in. I added, You're welcome to use the kitchens, but ask before you take anything from the gardens or smokehouse. You've seen my mother tap a keg with the palm of her hand. Now imagine that swat on your backside. Joey's eyes widened. Yes, sir, I most certainly will. Good lad, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. He saluted sharply, turned, and jogged toward the stables to ready my Griffin for flight. As the last of the visitors took to the air, the ranch settled again into its rhythm. The sound of hammering resumed. The smell of stew drifted from the house, and above it all, Sarge gave one last hoarse screech, watching the griffins vanish into the clouds until they were nothing but specks of light. The King's Guard Ranch felt both quieter and fuller somehow, emptied of its royal guests, yet brimming with something far greater. Purpose. I pushed Nimishi gently toward the side of the porch. Cover your ears, my sweet, I said, and took 2 firm steps forward. Then I drew a deep breath and bellowed so loud it echoed off the valley walls. King's Guard Ranch! Front and center! Move, move, move! Every hammer stopped mid-swing. Every conversation froze. Even Sarge turned his head from the gatepost. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. And then the scramble began. Boots thudded through the snow, doors flew open, and in less than a minute, everyone came running from all directions. Max's crew dropping tools, the lieutenants half-buttoned, Lepro tumbling off his contraption, and even Chili lumbering from the barn with Cindy perched proudly between his shoulders. I folded my arms, waiting for the stragglers. As predicted, the last trio appeared, Cindy and Chili, trudging through the snow with Lepro and Lola right behind, laughing and out of breath. When they finally joined the line, I marched straight up to Lepro and Lola, boots crunching hard in the snow. "You may be civilians," I said sternly, "but while you're here, you'll act like you have some pride in being here." Lepro blinked, then saluted with 2 fingers and a grin. "Aye, aye, Commander Sunshine." I ignored him, turned sharply, and faced the rest of my people. Nimishi stepped off the porch and came to stand 1 pace behind and to my left. Back straight, eyes forward, the picture of discipline. "Now," I barked, "if you hear an order like that again from me, Nimishi, or Captain Zart, you will stop what you're doing. Get here quickly, line up quietly, and await instruction. This ranch is now a military base, and by the light, it's going to look like one." I paced the line slowly, my breath curling white in the cold air. "We all had a good winter's festival," I continued, "but it's over now. I want every wreath, lantern, and streamer packed away in the barn. I want a clear path shoveled from the front gate to every building, the greenhouse glass cleaned and polished. If you want fresh vegetables till spring, you'll thank me later. And now, welcome, everyone, to the new Kingsguard Ranch." I clapped my hands once. "Move, people." Instantly, the yard came alive. Orders flew, laughter followed, and the kind of chaos only hard work can bring filled the air. Lepro was the first to act, shouting, "Cindy, with me, Chili. Let's show these folks how gnomes and bears get things done." Moments later, Chili was hitched to a plow with ropes across his chest, Cindy perched on his back holding the reins like a proper driver, and Lepro balanced on the plow behind her, adding weights to dig it deep into the snow. With one mighty pull, Chili snorted and leaned forward. The plow bit the snow and carved a perfect clean path straight toward the barn. "Ha! Look at that!" Lepro yelled. "Best snow-clearing crew in Azeroth." Cindy whooped with delight as Chili trudged on, the plow cutting wide lanes through the yard, snow curling off to either side like waves from a ship's bow. My father and Lola, watching from the porch, shared a quick glance. "We've got the greenhouse," they said in unison, then snatched up brooms, rags, and the only warm job on the ranch before anyone else could claim it. From inside, I heard Mom calling over the clatter of dishes. "We'll handle the kitchen, boys. Keep your boots out of my clean floor." Irene poked her head out, cheeks red from the heat of the stoves. "I've got bread rising and stew on the boil. Don't make me chase you off with a ladle again." "Wouldn't dream of it," I muttered, smiling. Marks and Goldsby were already at work, climbing ladders to strip garlands from the porch beams, calling down to each other as they packed everything neatly into wooden crates. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the gate. My mother, bundled in her thick green shawl, trotted out with something bright in her hands, a long knitted scarf the color of deep sky blue. "Hold now, lad," she said softly as she approached the post where Sarge sat preening. "You're the only one who didn't get a gift." Sarge tilted his head, one sharp eye blinking, as she wrapped the scarf gently around his neck and fussed with the ends until they lay just right. "There now," she murmured, scratching under his chin. "Straight and proper, my fine lad." Then, glancing left and right to make sure I wasn't looking, she pulled a bit of bacon from her apron pocket. "Don't tell your master," she whispered, and Sarge clicked his beak softly in approval. Satisfied, she gave his good wing a pat, stepped back, and admired her work. "Handsomest one on the ranch," she declared before trotting back toward the kitchen. Sarge, scarf gleaming against his feathers, spread his one good wing proudly and climbed back up to his post, standing tall as a king against the snow. I couldn't help but chuckle. "A one-winged eagle with a blue scarf," I said to Nimishi, "is officially the hallmark of our ranch." As the day progressed, the work took shape beautifully. Chili's steady plodding cleared every path from the front gate to the barn and back again, while Cindy giggled each time snow sprayed over the sides. Lepro barked orders and whooped like a ship's captain, steering the plow through drifts with military precision. By the time Max and his crew quit for the day, the frames of all three cottages stood roughed in, skeletal but proud, their wooden beams glowing honey gold under the afternoon sun. The decorations were packed and stacked neatly in the barn for next year, each crate labeled in Lola's tidy handwriting. And just as the last rays of sunlight brushed the hills, my father hung a metal triangle beside the side door of the main house. He stepped back, hands on his hips, admiring it like a master craftsman. There, he said. Every ranch needs a dinner bell. Right on cue, the door flew open, and Mom stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Aye, and every dinner bell needs ringin', she called, striking the triangle smartly 3 times. The clear, sharp notes carried through the air, bouncing off the snowy hills. Dinner! She hollered, voice full of pride. By the time the last hammer had fallen silent and the crew's sleds had disappeared down the snowy trail, the ranch had settled into that quiet hum that always comes after a hard day's work. Max and his men were gone for the night, their laughter fading into the trees. Inside the main house, the air was warm and thick with the smell of roasted meat, bread, and cinnamon. The long oak table gleamed under the lantern light, packed from end to end with steaming platters, mugs of ale, and the happiest sort of exhaustion. Everyone gathered around to enjoy Sweet Beth's and Irene's cooking. Even the lieutenants looked like farmhands now, shirts rolled up, faces flushed from the cold and the feast alike. I leaned back in my chair, looking down the table at Ernie. Where were you today? I haven't seen you all day. Ernie, mid-bite, nearly choked on a potato before swallowing hard. I was holding up the frame to one of your cottages when you bellowed, he said, pointing his fork at me, and left me there holding a whole house. Thank you very much. The table burst into laughter. But don't worry, he added with mock sternness. I heard you, and I'll be there next time. I raised my mug. Good lad. That's the spirit. Lola was the next to speak, eyes bright as she looked across the table. Mother Beth, she said between bites, you are a hell of a gardener. Imagine tomatoes in winter. Oh, ladies, you've got to go look. All the plants are tied with ribbons. The garden looks like something out of Silvermoon. I only wish we had some soft music playing in the greenhouse. Nimishi tilted her head thoughtfully. Is there enough room in there for a 10 by 10 tent? Lola blinked. Yes, easily. Why? Nimishi grinned, spearing a piece of roast venison. Then I've got your music and a bit of extra warmth. Bethan chuckled. You'd better not be starting any bonfires in me greenhouse, girl. The room filled with laughter again. Then came a sound from outside, an odd, warbling screech from Sarge that could only be described as laughter. The table fell silent. Before anyone could comment, there came another sound, a strange metallic clatter, like a kitchen cupboard falling out of the sky. What in the light? I started, already on my feet. We all rushed outside, spilling onto the porch in a tangle of boots and coats. Overhead, a glint of metal flashed against the dimming sky, pots, pans, ladles, and kettles clanging wildly as they swung from something airborne. And then we saw it. Joey, descending awkwardly on my griffin, the poor creature covered nose to tail in cooking gear, every pot and pan in the house tied to her harness. The racket was unbelievable. Cindy burst out laughing so hard she fell backward into the snow. She's a flying kitchen, she squealed. I groaned and rubbed my temples. Oh, for the love of light! As the griffin touched down, the noise of clanging metal nearly drowned out the laughter from everyone else. Joey, looking red-faced but grinning, called out, Marks! Goldsby! Come help me get this stuff to the hunter's cabin before Sweet Beth sees I raided her kitchen. My father was already halfway down the steps, laughing so hard his beard shook. I'll help, lad. This I've got to see up close. Ernie followed, nearly doubled over with laughter, while Joey and the 2 lieutenants started untying the tangle of pots and pans. I marched right up to Joey and held out my hand. Lieutenant Ironfist, I said flatly. He placed the griffin token in my palm without hesitation, still smiling. I patted my griffin's flank gently, speaking softly. I'm sorry, my girl. You'll never be humiliated like this again. Then I rubbed the token between my fingers. The griffin shimmered with light and vanished. Every single one of Joey's pots and pans clattered to the ground at once, bouncing and rolling across the snow in a chaotic chorus of clangs and crashes. Joey winced. Guess I'll, pick those up then. Good idea, I said, turning back toward the house as everyone howled with laughter. From the porch, Mom's voice rang out. Come back for dinner when you're done, boys. I'll keep it warm. Nimishi followed me inside, shaking her head with a smile. What's up your jumper? She asked, catching my expression. Joey, I said, exasperated. Treating my griffin like a flying pot rack. Can you imagine the humiliation, flying through Ironforge like that? Nimishi came up behind me and began rubbing my shoulders. First of all, she is a magical mount and has no feelings to hurt. I started to protest, but she held up a finger. Second, you gave it to him. And with that, she gave me a sharp swat on the back of the head and went back to her chair, humming cheerfully as she sat down to finish her meal. After dinner, still grumbling to myself about the pot rack incident, I decided a bit of fresh air and a good cigar might calm me down. The night outside was still and sharp, the kind of cold that wakes your bones but clears your head. Snow whispered softly off the roof, catching the orange glow from the lantern above the porch. I took a deep breath and exhaled slow, watching the mist curl away into the dark. Behind me, the door creaked open. My father, Lepro, and Ernie stepped out, each with that same expression men get when they know another man needs a good talking to, but they're polite enough to start with company instead. Dad sat beside me on the bench and, without a word, reached into my jacket pocket. He pulled out the small wooden cigar box I always kept tucked there, opened it, and took out 3. All right, son, he said as he offered one to Lepro and one to Ernie. Out with it. What's bothering you? He lit his own first, the flame from the match dancing in the cold air. The smell of tobacco filled the porch, warm and comforting. I jabbed my thumb toward the window where the 3 lieutenants could still be seen through the frosted glass, laughing at eating leftovers. Joey, that's what's bothering me. The nerve of him treating my griffin like a flying pot rack. Dad puffed, exhaled a stream of smoke into the night, and gave me a sideways grin. First, it's a magic mount. It has no feelings. Second, you gave it to him. I groaned, dragging a hand down my face. That's exactly what Nimishi said to me. Dad chuckled. Smart woman you got there, son. Lepro nodded, flicking ash from his cigar. I'd listen to her if I were you. Gnomes have a saying, the louder you shout, the more right your wife becomes. Works every time. Ernie nearly choked on his laugh. That explains my Irene, then. Dad leaned back, smoke curling around his head like a halo. So, he said, what's the plan? Plan for what? I asked, pretending not to know. He gave me that look. The same one I got as a boy when I was caught sneaking sweets before supper. Don't play dumb with me. I sighed and looked out across the darkened yard. All right, when the first cottage is done, we'll move Lepro and Lola into it. A married couple bunking with a little girl and one who walks around naked half the time. It's not the best influence, I'm sure. Lepro smirked. She's got spirit, I'll give her that. Too much of it, I said with a grin. Anyway, you'll be going back to the Zart Ranch tomorrow with the Davises. Ernie nodded. We were planning to, if that's all right. Fine by me, I said. As for the second cottage, that one's for you and Mom, Dad. Since you'll be here most of the time anyway. The Crown's going to offer you twice what you paid for the Zart Ranch. And I've got plans for that place too. But after everything here is finished. Dad's eyes twinkled through the cigar smoke. I think your mother will agree to double what we paid, though she may insist you keep the name. I wouldn't dream of changing it, I said, smiling. Dad clapped me on the shoulder. Good lad. The door creaked again, and Joey stepped out into the night, rubbing his hands together. Sarge? He asked carefully. Did I do something to make you angry? I motioned to the empty spot on the bench. Sit down, Joey. He did, looking nervous. I reached into my jacket again, pulled out one more cigar, and handed it to him. Before I give you this, answer a question for me. Anything, Sarge, he said. If that had been a real griffin, flesh and blood, would you have treated it the way you did? Joey shook his head quickly. No way, Sarge. I would have put all my cookware in a crate and let it carry it. This was just faster. I couldn't help but grin. Well, speed's not the same as sense. If I ever give you anything of mine to use again, treat it with respect, magic or not. Yes, Sarge. Sorry. Won't happen again, Joey said, eyed and earnest. I handed him the cigar. Good man. We sat there in easy silence after that, the 4 of us. Smoke curled lazily into the night sky, glowing orange against the stars. The snow around the porch gleamed in the lantern light, and the steady hum of the ranch, the creak of wood, the far-off snort of chili in the barn, settled into a rhythm as peaceful as breathing. Dad took a long puff and broke the quiet. "So, Don, what are your plans for the Zart Ranch?" I laughed softly. "Ha! Wouldn't you like to know?" He chuckled through the smoke. "Had to try, son." "You'll be accepting my offer before I tell you that, old man," I said with a grin. Dad smirked, exhaling a perfect ring of smoke that drifted off into the dark. "You're your mother's son, that's for sure." Lepro yawned, flicked his cigar ash into the snow, and stood. "Well, that's enough wisdom for one night. The missis'll be looking for me, and I value my ears too much to keep her waiting." Ernie followed suit, nodding. "Good night, Sarge." "Good night, boys," I said. When they were gone, Dad and I sat a while longer, watching the snow fall in slow, quiet sheets. The world felt right, simple, balanced, alive. Dad sighed, low and content. "You've done good, Don. This ranch, it's going to mean something to a lot of people." I nodded, feeling the weight of it, and the warmth too. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think it already does." We finished our cigars in comfortable silence. When the last embers dimmed, Dad patted my knee, stood, and went inside. I lingered a moment more, staring up at the stars over the King's Guard Ranch, their light glinting off the snow like scattered diamonds. Then I smiled, flicked the last ash into the drifts, and followed him in.